The ocean is a place of memory. Even before the first cities rose on riverbanks, before the first walls were carved with stories, the sea held its own history, silent, shifting, waiting. As the camera sinks beneath the Atlantic surface, the world above fades into a blue haze, a muffled realm where time seems to slow. Light fractures in beams across the water, dancing on stone shadows far deeper than any natural formation should exist. These shapes do not belong to geology. They belong to architecture, to intention, to a vanished mind. Pressure builds as the descent continues, the water turning darker, colder, older. The ocean floor rises from the abyss like a ghostly landscape. Broad steps carved into basalt, pillars lying broken in the sand, and rings of stone arranged with impossible precision. None of this appears on official maps. No record of human construction reaches this depth. And yet the ruin is unmistakable, a fragment of a city swallowed long before history learned to write its first lines. At the center of this forgotten seascape lies a pattern, a spiral, a signature, not random, not natural, but engineered. And embedded within this spiral, buried under silt and centuries, is something entirely out of place. A fragment of a medieval map sealed inside a corroded brass capsule. A map traced in the unmistakable style of the Knights Templar. This ink is faded, but its message is not. A series of coordinates, drawn in confident strokes, points straight to this underwater ruin. Beneath them, a symbol appears. Two interlocking circles crossed by a sword. It is not a common emblem of the order. It is a mark reserved only for their most covert missions, those known to a handful of men who were sworn to die before ever speaking of them. How did a medieval monastic military order know of a site that predates their era by thousands of years? And more unsettling, why did they go searching for it? As divers illuminate the stone rings with high-powered lights, sediment swirls upward like ancient dust. Strange carvings come into view along the fallen blocks. They echo the descriptions from Plato's dialogues, concentric divisions of a lost world, a city built in circles of earth and water. But these carvings are not merely decorative. They resemble encoded diagrams, etched with geometric strictness that suggests far more than myth. This is the moment that grips the viewer. The sudden realization that the Templars, guardians of Crusader states and keepers of Europe's most closely guarded secrets, were aware of something beneath the Atlantic long before sonar or satellites ever scanned this part of the world. The idea is preposterous, almost unthinkable, and yet the evidence sits quietly in the deep, untouched, and undeniable. Above the surface, the world has moved on. The Templar trials became a footnote, their legends reduced to treasure hunts and half-whispered conspiracies. But down here, far from any historian's archives, their presence lingers like a fingerprint preserved in stone. Their knowledge was not just spiritual or financial. It was geographical, cosmic, forbidden. The camera lingers on the cracked stone stairway leading deeper into the ruin. Barnacles cling to its edges. Small fish dart through the shadows. And then, just for a moment, the light catches something else. A faint gleam, metallic, half-buried beneath rubble. It appears to be the edge of a chest, its metalwork carved with crosses and spirals. A chest that clearly did not originate from any Atlantean civilization. A chest that had to have been placed here centuries after the cataclysm that drowned this city. The mind races with possibilities. Did a group of Templars physically reach this site? Did they discover remnants of an older world, long erased by the sea? And if so, what compelled them to keep it secret? Was it fear, reverence, or orders given by a higher power, one that might have known more about the ancient world than any king or pope dared to imagine? As ocean currents sweep across the ruins, the sensation grows that this place is not dead. It is dormant, waiting. Its stones hold stories of an age when the earth itself convulsed in fire and water, erasing an entire civilization. But they also hold traces of those who came later. Men who wore white mantles marked with red crosses. Men who did not belong to this world of silence but entered it willingly, searching for something humanity had forgotten. The camera pulls back slowly, revealing the vast scope of the submerged landscape. What lies beneath is far larger than a ruin. It is a message. A warning, perhaps. A memory left by a civilization that understood both the heavens and the earth with a depth we have barely begun to rediscover. At its heart, the Templar map rests like a key, a bridge between two timelines that should never have collided. And yet they did. The ocean swallows secrets, but it never destroys them, keeps them intact, hidden until the right moment, waiting for the right hands to lift them into the light again. The Templars believed something here was worth risking exile, torture, and death to protect. Their enemies thought they searched for gold, but perhaps what they found was far more dangerous. A truth so ancient and so disruptive that it threatened the foundations of the world they lived in. As the final image fades into the deep, one question lingers like the echo of a distant storm. What did the Knights Templar discover beneath the Atlantic, and why were they willing to die to keep it from us? The night the Templar order fell was not a single moment. It was a slow tightening of a noose that had been prepared long before any knight realized he was walking into a trap. Paris, 1307. The streets were colder than usual, as if the city itself sensed an unspoken dread creeping through its alleys. Torchlight flickered against stone walls while armed men gathered in silence. They were not preparing for war. They were preparing for an extermination. Inside the Templar stronghold, the evening had begun like any other. Brothers in white mantles whispered prayers. Oil lamps burned with soft golden halos, and scrolls were being rolled shut after hours of careful study. No one imagined that within minutes, everything would change. The order had enemies, yes, kings, barons, even princes of the church, but they had faced such challenges before. They believed their purpose was divinely protected. They were wrong. As the king's soldiers advanced, the first sound to break the quiet was not a battle cry but a low, rhythmic thud. Fists pounding against the Templar gates. It echoed through the halls like a heartbeat turning frantic. Confusion rippled among the brothers. Some reached instinctively for swords. Others froze, sensing something deeper than conflict. A betrayal in its purest form. Outside, royal officers read a proclamation accusing the Templars of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable sins. The charges were absurd, but no one cared about truth that night. King Philip IV, drowning in debt to the order, had found his solution. If he could not repay what he owed, he would destroy his creditors instead. And the church, pressured and politically cornered, allowed it to happen. When the gates finally crashed open, chaos filled the courtyard. Soldiers surged in like a dark tide. Torches flared, shadows darted, and metal clashed in tight, frantic bursts. The Templars had been trained for war in distant lands, but not for an ambush crafted by the very nation they had once defended. Some fought back, some surrendered, all were overwhelmed. But something strange occurred amid the violence. A handful of high-ranking Templars slipped away into inner chambers, taking with them sealed satchels and scrolls guarded for generations. These men did not panic. They moved with purpose, as if rehearsing a plan they hoped never to need. Rumors would later speak of a warning whispered days earlier, a letter sent in secret, or perhaps a vision foreseen by those who watched the stars. Whatever the truth, these brothers acted swiftly, retrieving items not of gold or coin but of knowledge. Within those chambers lay the order's deepest secrets. Maps not yet known to cartographers, coded journals from distant expeditions, relics whose origins were buried in myth, and fragments of something older than Christianity itself. They gathered what they could carry, the things deemed too dangerous to fall into royal hands, and vanished through hidden passages carved beneath the stronghold. While the king's men dragged knights into the streets in chains, these few guardians disappeared into the night, their whereabouts lost to history. Some headed toward friendly ports, others toward monasteries loyal to the cause. But one group, according to whispers preserved in obscure chronicles, fled west with a sealed chest and a set of coordinates that made no sense to anyone who saw them. As dawn broke over Paris, smoke rose from the Templar compound. The city stank of fear and betrayal. Brothers sat shackled in dungeons, awaiting torture designed to extract confessions they had never imagined uttering. Outside, the king triumphantly declared victory over heresy. His words rang hollow, but power does not require honesty, only force. Yet even as the order crumbled, something survived. The Templars had always believed knowledge could outlive any empire. They understood that truth, once found, could not be unlearned. And the truth they carried that night was not about Christendom or crusades. It was about something far older, something they had sworn to protect from kings, from popes, even from their own brothers. In the years that followed, historians would debate the fall of the order. Some blamed greed, others politics. Few asked what the Templars themselves feared might be uncovered. Why had they safeguarded maps of the western seas long before Europeans claimed to know those waters? Why had they studied ancient ruins in lands far beyond their jurisdiction? Why had they built hidden vaults beneath monasteries, storing artifacts of unknown origin? And most of all, what exactly were those few fleeing knights trying so desperately to protect as the order dissolved around them? The collapse of the Templars was not merely the destruction of a military brotherhood. It was the silencing of men who had stumbled upon a secret that stretched across centuries, across oceans, across civilizations forgotten by time. A secret powerful enough to justify betrayal, imprisonment, and execution. As the dust settled, one unsettling truth lingered in the shadows of Europe. The Templars had not fallen because of what they did, but because of what they knew. The manuscript was discovered by accident, or at least that is what the archivist claimed. It had been wedged behind a false panel in a monastery library, hidden so carefully that centuries of dust had formed a second skin over its leather binding. The cover bore no title, no crest, nothing that hinted at its importance. Only a faint imprint of a cross, weathered and uneven, suggested it had once belonged to a man who served under the banner of the Knights Templar. But inside, the words crackled with a force that felt far older than the ink that held them. The writing began abruptly, as though the author had no time for a proper introduction. A single line stretched across the top of the first page. To whoever finds this, know that I am not mad. I am hunted because I saw what I should not have seen. The tone was desperate, but also strangely calm. The voice of someone who had accepted death long before he put quill to parchment. Historians later attributed the manuscript to a Templar known only as Brother Matthew, a man who disappeared the very night the order was seized. He wrote of fleeing Paris with 2 other knights, carrying a sealed chest that their commander had entrusted to them with trembling hands. They escaped into the countryside under cover of darkness, moving from forest to forest, never staying in one place long enough for rumors to form trails. Each night they took turns standing watch, haunted by the certainty that enemies were closing in. But according to Matthew's testament, it wasn't the king's men who terrified them. It was something older, something he believed was awakened the moment the chest was removed from its sacred hiding place. As the days passed, Matthew's entries became stranger. He described dreams that came to him unbidden. Visions of a city drowned beneath rising waters, of towers collapsing under storms of fire, of a sky lit by geometric patterns that pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth itself. He wrote of hearing a distant humming in the wilderness, a resonance that seemed to guide him toward the west, toward the edge of the world. It frightened him, yet he could not resist it. He felt as though the visions were not dreams at all, but memories. Memories not his own. One passage stood out more than any other. He claimed that on the 5th night of their flight, they opened the chest out of fear it might contain something cursed. But inside they found only parchment scrolls, brittle with age, marked with symbols unlike anything in Christian or Hebrew texts. The drawings showed concentric rings of land and water, radiating outward like ripples from a stone cast into a still pond. Beneath the rings were lines of characters that resembled neither Latin nor Greek, yet they seemed familiar to Matthew, as if he had seen them carved somewhere long ago. The final scroll contained a set of coordinates. At first glance, they appeared meaningless, a series of numbers and angles too precise to be medieval. But Matthew claimed he recognized their arrangement from a secret study deep within the temple archives. Certain high-ranking brothers had whispered of a forbidden chart, a map charted long before the First Crusade, documenting lands across the Western Ocean. Lands that should not exist. Matthew's writing grew increasingly feverish as he described the realization that hit him. The chest held directions to a place Plato had written about centuries earlier, the fabled island of Atlantis. He believed that the Templars had found evidence of its existence long before their fall and had hidden the knowledge to protect it from earthly kings and corrupt clergy. According to his words, the Order's leaders feared that revealing the truth about an older, far more advanced civilization would unravel the foundations of Christian authority. But the most chilling part of his testimony came near the end. Matthew wrote that one of the other knights, Brother Alan, began to mutter in his sleep, repeating a single phrase over and over, "The vault calls to us." He spoke of a chamber beneath the sea, built to withstand the fury of the cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis. A chamber holding the last message of a civilization wiped from the surface of the earth. Matthew insisted the dreams were not madness but a summons. A signal awakening within their minds, triggered the moment they opened the ancient scrolls. 2 days after describing these visions, Matthew's entries stopped abruptly. The final page was smeared, as though written in extreme haste. The words were jagged, uneven, and slipped into a panic the earlier pages never showed. "They have found us. Not the king's men. Something else. If this account survives, know that the vault is real. The sea guards it. The Order tried to protect it. Forgive us for what we failed to finish." The manuscript ended with a symbol, the same interlocking circles crossed by a sword that appeared on the underwater map discovered centuries later. That symbol, once thought to be a variant Templar insignia, was now suspected to mark their most secret mission, one that led them not to Jerusalem, not to the Holy Grail, but to a forgotten world buried beneath the Atlantic. Brother Matthew vanished from history without a trace. His companions disappeared as well, their bodies never found. Only this manuscript remained, a final confession written by a man running from enemies no one could name. And within it, a clue that connected the Templars to a myth humanity had dismissed for millennia. The testament raised a question far more unsettling than any accusation of heresy or treason. What did the exiled brothers discover out there? And why did it terrify them enough to hide the truth in a place no one was meant to find? The map was unlike anything scholars had ever seen, not because of its age, but because of its impossibility. It was first mentioned in an inventory of confiscated Templar possessions but vanished shortly after the Order's dissolution. Centuries later, a diver exploring a collapsed coastal cave in western France surfaced with a corroded brass cylinder clutched in his hand. Inside it, wrapped in layers of waxed linen, was the very same map. Though water-damaged and partially faded, the ink still clung stubbornly to the parchment, as if refusing to surrender its secrets to time. The first thing that unsettled researchers was the accuracy. Medieval maps were notorious for their distortions. Coastlines exaggerated, continents misshapen, mythical creatures swimming in uncharted seas. But this map was different. Its lines were clean, its geometry precise, and its compass rose aligned with a modern understanding of magnetic deviation. Whoever drew it possessed knowledge far beyond that of ordinary 13th century cartographers. Even more disturbing, it charted not just land, but oceanic ridges, trenches, and submerged plateaus no medieval sailor could ever have imagined. At the center of the parchment, circled in red pigment, lay a location deep in the Atlantic basin. There were no islands in that region today. No ports, no reefs, not even a shoal. Just open water stretching endlessly in every direction. But beside the circle, in the sharp, deliberate handwriting of a Templar scribe, was a single word, Ahriman, a name that did not appear in any European atlas or Templar record. Linguists later speculated it might be derived from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning, the place that rose. If so, the implication was staggering. More symbols surrounded the central mark, spirals, triangles, and faint grids resembling celestial charts. Their pattern echoed the layout described by Plato in Critias, a description scholars had long dismissed as allegory. But here, drawn centuries before modern archaeology, was a diagram matching his account with startling precision. Concentric rings of land and water, oriented perfectly toward the cardinal directions. No medieval monk would have reason to depict a fictional city with such technical detail. No medieval navigator would draw a vanished island in the middle of an empty ocean. And no Templar knight should have had the knowledge to do either. The map's materials added another layer of mystery. The parchment was traced to sheep raised in northern Iberia, typical of the 1200s. But the ink contained flecks of crushed lapis lazuli, a pigment imported from Afghanistan and reserved only for manuscripts of extreme importance. Whatever message the Templars hoped to preserve here, they valued it enough to use some of the rarest pigments available. And then there was the compass. It was drawn not with the simple directional cross found in medieval charts, but with a 12-point star resembling ancient Phoenician and even Minoan seafaring symbols. This was not a Christian map. It was something older, wearing the disguise of Templar craft. The deeper researchers studied it, the more impossible it became. One analyst, after months of cross-referencing seismic maps, nearly fell out of his chair when he realized the red-circled coordinates aligned exactly with a massive, rectangular anomaly detected on modern sonar scans. The anomaly lay beneath over 2 miles of water, partly buried under volcanic sediment. Yet its edges were straight, too straight for nature, and its orientation matched the layout sketched on the Templar map. As word spread through academic circles, the map gained a reputation not as a relic but as a threat to established history. How could medieval knights possess knowledge of underwater formations only satellites and deep ocean probes could verify? Some dismissed the map as a later forgery. Others insisted it was a product of luck and imagination. But the more skeptics argued, the more evidence mounted that the Templars had found something extraordinary. A strange detail sat in the bottom corner, a coded inscription resembling a blend of Latin shorthand and geometric glyphs. After months of study, cryptographers deciphered its meaning. It read, "This chart shall remain for those who continue the work. The path was shown to us as it was shown to the first ones." The last phrase, "the first ones," sparked fevered debate. Did the Templars believe they were following a trail left by an earlier civilization? One whose knowledge survived the cataclysm Plato described? If the map were authentic and the mounting evidence pointed strongly in that direction, then it meant the Templars did not merely suspect the existence of Atlantis. They believed they had found its remains. And more unsettling still, they treated the discovery not as treasure, but as a mission. The map's edges showed signs of being handled frequently, its creases worn from repeated folding and unfolding. This was not a ceremonial artifact or a curiosity tucked away in a vault. It was a working chart. It had traveled. It had been used. And if Brother Matthew's manuscript was to be believed, the map was only one piece of a larger puzzle. A puzzle leading the Templars into forbidden waters, far beyond the reach of kings or papal decrees. As experts debated the map, one question hung over every conversation like a storm cloud. If the Templars truly sailed toward these coordinates, what did they expect to find waiting for them beneath the Atlantic? And even more disturbing, did they succeed? Plato never intended his writings to become the spark of 1,000 myths. Yet that is exactly what happened. For centuries, the tale of Atlantis existed somewhere between metaphor and fantasy, a philosophical parable dismissed by scholars and mocked by rationalists. But when examined through a different lens, the dialogues of Timaeus and Critias read less like allegory and more like the fragmented memory of a catastrophe so ancient that only echoes survived. And now, with the Templar map revealing details Plato could never have invented alone, his words demanded a second look. The story begins with Solon, the Athenian lawmaker who traveled to Egypt in the 6th century BCE. According to Plato, Solon encountered priests in the city of Sais who guarded records older than Greece itself. Records that preserved stories from a time when humans had not yet built the great cities of classical antiquity. The priests spoke of a powerful island civilization beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a people advanced in architecture, astronomy, and engineering. They possessed knowledge of cycles in nature, celestial alignments, and forces that shaped continents. But their pride, the priests warned, became their downfall. Without warning, the earth convulsed, the seas rose, and the islands sank in a single day and night of destruction. For generations, historians insisted the tale was symbolic, a warning about hubris, nothing more. But Plato made an odd claim in Critias. He said the story was not his invention, nor even Solon's creation, but an inheritance from a time before memory. What could that mean? Why would Egyptian priests cling to such a specific story unless it had roots in something real? And why did their descriptions align so precisely with sudden geological events now known to have occurred around 11,600 years ago? Modern science began to change the conversation. Evidence of a dramatic climate catastrophe at the end of the Ice Age, known as the Younger Dryas, emerged from ice core samples in Greenland. The planet had swung from warming to freezing and back again in a shockingly short period. Entire ecosystems collapsed. Megafauna vanished. Sea levels surged by hundreds of feet, swallowing coastlines, erasing settlements, and forcing migrations across continents. Something devastating had indeed happened. Suddenly, Plato's timeline did not seem impossible. It seemed uncannily accurate. Meanwhile, archaeologists uncovered sites older than anyone expected civilization to be. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a stone temple complex built by hunter-gatherers 6,000 years before the pyramids. Submerged cities off the coasts of India and Japan. Strange structures on the Azores Plateau whose origins remain unclear. Everywhere researchers looked, pieces of a forgotten chapter in human history began to surface. Pieces suggesting that humanity had been organized, knowledgeable, and far more advanced long before conventional history allowed. This resurgence of evidence cast a new light on the Templar map. The coordinates marked on their chart corresponded not to a random spot in the ocean, but to a submerged ridge that was above sea level around the time Plato's Atlantis supposedly flourished. The layout of rings depicted on the map mirrored the very scheme Plato described, alternating bands of land and water forming a geometric city plan. And some of the symbols on the map resembled motifs found in ancient ruins thousands of miles apart, as though the same cultural memory had rippled across the world after a single massive event. It was not just the geography that resonated with Plato's account, it was the philosophy. The Templars, unlike many medieval institutions, were obsessed with what they called the purity of knowledge. They sought wisdom in mathematics, sacred geometry, astronomy, and ancient languages. They collected texts others dismissed as heretical or pagan. What if, in their archaeological pursuits across the Holy Land and beyond, they stumbled across remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization? And what if those remnants matched the stories Plato had preserved? In this new context, Plato's dialogues felt less like creative literature and more like the last surviving page of a much older book. A book whose remaining pages lay somewhere beneath the Atlantic. What had once been dismissed as philosophical metaphor now appeared to be a coded historical account, one so dangerous it had to be disguised in story form. Scholars divided into two camps. Some insisted these parallels were coincidence, a product of imaginative connections fueled by the Templar legend. Others argued that myths often hold kernels of truth, preserved like fossils within cultural memory. They pointed to flood myths spanning nearly every civilization. The Sumerian flood, the biblical deluge, the Greek tale of Deucalion, the Aztec story of Atanasiu, and even Native American legends describing great waters swallowing ancient cities. Why would every corner of the world tell the same story unless something catastrophic linked them all? The deeper one looked into Plato's text, the more peculiar details stood out. Details that matched the underwater anomaly the Templars had highlighted. The dimensions of the central island. The precise alignment of structures to the cardinal directions. The reverence for geometry and celestial cycles. The sudden, violent end. But the most unsettling detail was philosophical, not geological. Plato claimed Atlantis possessed a vault of knowledge, a protected chamber containing the accumulated wisdom of the Atlantean priesthood. It was said to preserve their understanding of the stars, the earth, and forces yet unknown. If such a vault existed and the Templars had found evidence of it, then their secrecy made perfect sense. Knowledge that powerful would threaten kingdoms, religions, and the entire structure of medieval authority. And so the question grew more compelling. Had the Templars not simply rediscovered Atlantis as a mythic place, but identified it as a real, physical location whose remains still lay hidden far beneath the waves? Plato's story, once regarded as fiction, now felt like the first surviving clue in a long chain connecting ancient catastrophe to medieval secrecy and ultimately to a submerged structure waiting to be explored. The line between legend and history blurred, and with each new discovery, it became harder to deny the possibility that the Templars were following a trail humanity had lost long ago. For centuries, historians assumed medieval Europeans rarely ventured far from familiar coasts. They imagined small wooden ships clinging to shorelines, terrified of the great Western Ocean that stretched into endless blue. But hidden within crumbling port records, monastic ledgers, and fragmented Templar accounts lies a very different picture. One of daring voyages, secret expeditions, and whispered rumors of lands beyond the horizon long before Columbus was ever born. Section by section, piece by piece, a forgotten chapter emerges. The Templars may have journeyed into the Atlantic guided not by chance, but by ancient knowledge rediscovered in the East. In the decades before their fall, the Knights Templar accumulated more than just wealth. During the Crusades, they had access to libraries in Jerusalem, Antioch, and Damascus, repositories that contained scrolls older than Christianity itself. Some were written in Greek, others in Aramaic, Phoenician, or languages no scholar could fully decipher. Among these were accounts of voyages by ancient mariners who spoke of a great land across the sunset, a place rich in metals, forests, and strange beasts. Most dismissed these tales as fantastical. But the Templars were not ordinary scholars. They believed that truth could hide inside myth, waiting to be recognized by those with eyes to see. As they grew in power, their curiosity expanded beyond the Holy Land. Knights stationed in Portugal and western France heard sailors' stories of currents that pulled westward, winds that seemed to beckon travelers beyond the known map, and birds that migrated out toward the open ocean. Fishermen whispered of drifting logs from trees not found in Europe, washing ashore after storms. One Templar chronicler described a washed-up canoe carved from an unfamiliar type of wood, its design unlike anything seen in the Atlantic world. Small clues easily ignored unless one was looking for them. And the Templars were looking. Portugal in the 13th century was a frontier of exploration. Its coastline faced the deep Atlantic, and its people were skilled sailors long before the Age of Discovery. The Order of Christ, the successor to the Templars after their suppression, would later guide explorers like Prince Henry the Navigator. But the roots of that maritime tradition stretched back to the Templars themselves. They funded shipyards, maintained fleets, and developed navigational techniques that were far ahead of their time. Some of their vessels were built not for war, but for endurance and distance, strong hulls, reinforced masts, and storage for long voyages. A few rare documents even mention voyages into the setting sun, undertaken by Templar-affiliated sailors. These records appear abruptly, as if someone tried to erase most of the evidence. But enough remains to suggest that multiple expeditions sailed westward, guided by a combination of astronomical knowledge, ancient maps, and perhaps even the coordinates found in the mysterious Atlantean-like scrolls recovered in the Middle East. What were they searching for? Some historians believe the Templars hoped to establish new trade routes, free from the political grip of Europe. Others think they sought islands rich in resources to support their growing independence from the crown and church. But a more intriguing theory emerges when the clues are examined together. The Templars may have been following a trail left by an ancient civilization, the same civilization Plato described, the same one the Templar map eerily mirrored. More evidence surfaces in the form of strange objects discovered in European monasteries connected to the order. Volcanic stones not native to Europe, seeds from plants that grow only in the Americas, and fragments of pottery bearing designs similar to those found in pre-Columbian sites. These artifacts were quietly catalogued, then forgotten, but modern analysis suggests they are genuine. If so, they must have reached Europe somehow before official history claims such contact was possible. The pattern becomes clearer when considering the political climate. As the Templars grew wealthier, they also grew more secretive. They had their own coded language, their own private rituals, and their own internal network of scholars and explorers. Their knowledge was not shared freely, not even with kings or popes. If they discovered something monumental in the Atlantic, they would have guarded it fiercely. This is where their voyages take on a more clandestine nature. Some ships were launched at night, without public ceremony. Cargo manifests were kept incomplete or encrypted. Only a handful of knights were informed of the true destination. These voyages did not return with spices, fabrics, or goods typically brought from the East. Instead, They returned quietly, often docking at isolated ports under cover of darkness. One account, attributed to a Portuguese monk who witnessed one such secret landing, describes a ship arriving with hull damage and sails torn by storms. The men disembarking were exhausted, bearded, and strangely silent. They carried no treasure, only sealed crates escorted directly to a Templar commandery. Within days, the ship was dismantled, its wood burned, its metal fittings melted down. It was as though the voyage itself needed to be erased. Why destroy proof of a journey, unless the cargo or the knowledge gained during the voyage was never meant for the world outside the Order? As the Templars deepened their westward explorations, they began gathering information about ocean currents, migratory patterns, weather cycles, and celestial alignments. Some of their notes match modern understandings with uncanny accuracy. How could a medieval order possess such insight? The answer may lie in the ancient scrolls they acquired, fragments of older knowledge, preserved through catastrophe, passed down by survivors of the world that existed before the flood. The more the Templars learned, the more they seemed to believe there was something out there, something vast, ancient, and important. Whether they sought a lost continent, a vault of forgotten knowledge, or the remnants of a civilization erased by the sea, one truth becomes undeniable. The Knights Templar did not fear the Atlantic. They pursued it, silently, methodically, purposefully. Their voyages into the West were not accidents of curiosity. They were part of a covert mission, one whose full significance would not be understood until modern technology revealed structures hidden beneath miles of cold, crushing water. The Knights had sailed toward a mystery far older than their order, guided by secrets they were never meant to possess. The village was barely a dot on medieval maps, a lonely mark along the Portuguese coastline where the land curved inward as if trying to hide something from the rest of the world. Locals called it Porto dos Homens Silenciosos, the port of the silent men, though no one seemed to remember when the name first appeared. It clung to the edge of the Atlantic like a secret whispered too close to the waves. The wind here carried an odd chill, even in summer, and the fishermen who lived there rarely spoke of the visitors who once came wearing white mantles and bearing red crosses. For centuries, the village was dismissed as just another coastal settlement battered by storms and forgotten by history. But deep within the oral traditions passed from grandmother to grandchild were stories that refused to die. Stories of ships that did not belong to local fleets, ships with reinforced hulls and triangular sails, ships that arrived quietly and departed even more quietly, leaving behind tension that clung to the very air. The people who crewed them were described as solemn, disciplined, and frighteningly determined. They spoke little, paid generously, and vanished before dawn. The villagers knew better than to ask questions. At night, old fishermen would gather around fires and repeat a tale their ancestors had sworn never to record on paper. They spoke of a particular night, stormless, eerily calm, when 3 unfamiliar vessels appeared just beyond the surf. They carried no flags, yet their crosses glowed under the moonlight. The men aboard did not call for assistance, nor did they signal for guidance. Instead, they rowed ashore with crates wrapped in tarred canvas, carried them across the sand, and disappeared into the pine forest behind the village without uttering a single word. The locals pretended not to see. The next morning, the ships were gone. Generations later, when researchers began retracing the routes of suspected Templar expeditions, their path led them to this peculiar village. At first, nothing about the shoreline seemed unusual. The waves crashed against familiar rocks, gulls screamed overhead, and the scent of salt hung thick in the air. But divers soon found something strange just past the continental shelf, a cluster of iron and stone anchors, unlike any used by Portuguese sailors of the era. They were larger, heavier, and engraved with faint markings that only became visible once cleaned of barnacles. One anchor bore a symbol that froze the researchers in place, the same interlocking circles crossed by a sword found on the Templar map and on the manuscript of Brother Matthew. The carving was eroded but unmistakable. Even more unnerving, the anchor was embedded in rock strata far below the depth typical for medieval fishing fleets. Whatever ship had dropped it must have been far offshore, deeper into the Atlantic than any sailor of the age dared to venture. The dive team's excitement grew as they examined additional artifacts. A length of chain fashioned with a metallurgical technique inconsistent with local production. A carved wooden beam preserved in cold water, still faintly marked with geometric symbols identical to those associated with the Templar seal. And most intriguingly, a fragment of a ceramic jar containing resin not native to Europe, a resin found in ancient American coastal cultures. None of this should have been here. When archaeologists presented their findings to local elders, the villagers exchanged uneasy glances. One of the oldest men, his voice fragile as the wind, leaned forward and said something his family had kept quiet for generations. The Templars had a hidden dock nearby, not a grand harbor, but a small, sheltered cove protected by towering cliffs and accessible only during low tide. They used it rarely, perhaps only for missions of exceptional importance. His grandfather once took him there as a child, pointing at the weathered remains of wooden posts embedded in the rock. They came for something, the old man recalled, something the sea didn't want to give back. Inspired by this revelation, researchers undertook a survey of the area around the cove. After days of scanning the seabed, their instruments detected what appeared to be a sunken launch platform. Stone blocks arranged in a pattern suggesting deliberate construction, half buried by centuries of sand. It was not a wharf built to accommodate fleets, but a discreet staging area for small groups carrying secret cargo, a perfect place for launching expeditions that demanded silence. As divers continued their exploration, they uncovered the remains of a vessel beneath a blanket of silt. Its shape was unmistakably medieval but of a design unlike common European ships. Reinforced ribs, double-layered planks, storage compartments lined with waterproof resin. And tucked inside one compartment, a rusted clasp seal engraved with the familiar Templar insignia. There was no treasure aboard, no gold, no relics, only the skeletal remains of a voyage that seemed to have ended in catastrophe. Yet one thing puzzled the team. The ship had sunk facing west. Ships caught in storms typically twist, break, or drift before settling. But this vessel rested as though it had been traveling in a straight, fixed direction. Toward the open ocean, toward the coordinates found on the ancient map, toward the anomaly now believed to be the remnants of Atlantis. What happened to the crew? Why did no record of their journey survive? Why did the Templars choose such a remote, silent port for their operations? And what compelled them to bury their discoveries beneath the sea and beneath centuries of secrecy? The deeper the investigation went, the clearer the pattern became. The port of the silent men was not chosen for convenience. It was chosen for invisibility. The voyages launched from this forgotten shoreline were not meant to be witnessed, recorded, or remembered. They belonged to a mission so astonishing that even within the order, only a select few knew it existed. Standing on the cliffs above the cove, with waves crashing relentlessly against the rocks below, one can almost imagine the scene centuries ago. Cloaked knights loading sealed crates onto sturdy vessels, whispering final prayers, and pushing out into the dark Atlantic. Not in search of land, but in search of history itself. And somewhere beneath the cold, unforgiving water, the remains of their mission still sleep, waiting for the world to finally understand why the Templars risked everything to sail into the unknown. The discovery of the seal began as an accident, a shift of currents, a slide of sand, and suddenly something unnatural glinted beneath the beam of a diver's flashlight. At first it looked like a mere stone slab, cracked by centuries of underwater pressure. But as the diver brushed away the silt, the truth emerged. This was no ordinary stone. It was far too smooth, its edges too precise, its symmetry too perfect. Someone or something had shaped it with deliberate intention long before the Atlantic swallowed this part of the world. The slab rested partly buried at the mouth of a deep ravine, wedged between two massive basalt columns. Its pale surface shimmered faintly, as if made from a mineral unknown in any medieval quarry. But what truly startled the dive team were the carvings etched across it. They were unlike anything from medieval Europe, spirals flowing into triangles, circles intersecting with star-like motifs, and a lattice pattern that seemed almost mathematical in its precision. Yet embedded between these ancient symbols were unmistakable Templar marks. the 8-pointed cross, the double-barred sword, and a crest that matched insignias found on Templar artifacts across France and Portugal. The two styles should never have coexisted. One belonged to a civilization thousands of years older than recorded history, while the other belonged to a medieval order of warrior monks. And yet here, etched into the same slab, they formed a single continuous narrative, as though the Templars had not only discovered the structure but contributed to it, leaving their own interpretations alongside the older, deeper language already carved there. The divers secured high-resolution images and brought them to archaeologists who were stunned to see how the symbols aligned with ancient megalithic traditions found across the world. Some markings resembled those seen at Göbekli Tepe. Others echoed spirals carved in prehistoric Irish tombs. A few bore uncanny resemblance to inscriptions off the coast of Japan. The geographical spread made no sense. These cultures were separated by continents and oceans, yet their languages, abstract, geometric, almost astrophysical, shared the same underlying design philosophy. It was as if they were fragments of a global tradition, one that predated recorded civilization. The Templar additions made the slab even more mysterious. Their carvings were not clumsy medieval additions. The lines were smooth, practiced, and integrated intentionally into the existing motifs. Whoever carved them understood the older symbols well enough to blend them seamlessly. This implied something radical, that the Templars had deciphered at least part of the ancient script. They had not simply stumbled upon an artifact, they had interacted with it. As the team mapped the surrounding area, they discovered the slab was not isolated. It was part of a larger formation, a broad stone platform leading to what looked like the remains of a doorway. Two monolithic pillars flanked the entry, each carved with layers of symbols so dense they resembled the bindings of an immense book. The doorway itself was sealed by the slab, which appeared intentionally placed to block entry. The alignment of the structure suggested advanced engineering, precise orientation to the cardinal directions, flawless right angles, and a geometry that mirrored celestial arrangements dated to roughly 12,000 years ago, the approximate time frame of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. To test the slab's composition, the divers extracted a tiny sample using a specialized microdrill. Laboratory tests revealed the material was not a single substance but a composite of limestone, quartz, and an unknown crystalline binder that did not match any natural formation. This binder had fused the minerals together with such strength that the slab remained intact even under crushing oceanic pressure. The engineers who examined it admitted privately that replicating such a material with modern techniques would be difficult. Whoever built this had understood structural science on a level that should have been impossible for a pre-Ice Age culture. But the most profound discovery came when researchers digitally enhanced the center of the slab. There, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a faint set of concentric circles intersected by a vertical line, the same design found on the Templar map, the manuscript of Brother Matthew, and the anchor recovered near the port of the Silent Men. This was no coincidence. It was a signature, a beacon, a motif that connected medieval knights to an era long buried beneath the waves. Some believed this seal marked the entrance to a vault, a chamber built to preserve the knowledge of an ancient civilization wiped out by a global catastrophe. Others argued that it could be a ritual site, a sacred doorway meant to be opened only under certain celestial conditions. But the presence of Templar markings shifted the conversation entirely. It meant the Order had not only reached this location but had understood something crucial about it. They had perceived meaning in the symbols and added their own interpretations, as if documenting their role in a mission that transcended their own time. The idea was staggering. The Templars had found evidence of a civilization so ancient and advanced that it challenged every chronological boundary of human development. Why had they not revealed it? Why had they kept it hidden even from the church and kings who feared them? Perhaps because what they found was not merely a ruin, but a truth that threatened the foundations of power itself. A truth that would reveal humanity's history not as a linear ascent, but as a cycle of rise, destruction, and survival. As the camera lingers on the seal beneath the waves, the eerie sense grows that the stone is not a monument but a barrier. It was built to hold something back, or to protect something meant only for those with the wisdom to understand it. The Templars must have sensed this. They must have known the danger. and yet they pressed forward into the unknown, leaving behind symbols that whispered, "We were here. We understood enough to be afraid." The notion of a forgotten civilization older than Egypt, Sumer, or the Indus Valley once belonged firmly to the realm of myth. Scholars scoffed at it, archaeologists dismissed it, and historians waved it away as romantic fantasy. But myths are stubborn things. They linger in the corners of human memory, murmuring faint reminders of a time when the world was different. A time before the great meltwaters swallowed coastlines, before the seas rose like a slow, unstoppable tide. And now, with every discovery at the Atlantic ridge, those murmurs were beginning to sound less like legend and more like echoes of something real. The foundation of the idea is simple. If an advanced culture existed before the end of the last ice age, much of its world now lies underwater. At the height of the glacial era, sea levels were more than 400 feet lower than they are today. Vast plains, islands, and archipelagos dotted coastlines now buried beneath the waves. What we call the ocean floor may once have been someone's home, someone's city, someone's world. Near the Azores archipelago, sonar scans have revealed odd structures that defy natural explanation. Long straight formations resembling roadways, platforms with 90-degree angles, and walls that appear to run parallel for astonishing distances. Geologists insist these are natural volcanic features, yet divers describe them differently: worn steps, flat surfaces, and patterns too symmetrical for coincidence. The debate continues unresolved, but each new anomaly nudges the argument further away from pure chance. Off the coast of India, the sunken city of Dvarka revealed stone blocks carved with astonishing precision, now submerged beneath the Arabian Sea. In Japan, the Yonaguni monument rises from the seabed like a forgotten pyramid. Don't let go angles, terraces, and sharp steps worn smooth over millennia. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe shattered the timeline of archaeology by proving that structured, symbolic architecture existed 12,000 years ago. Long before agriculture, long before writing, long before civilization was supposed to be possible. And near the Bahamas' mysterious Bimini Road continues to challenge the boundaries of natural versus engineered formations. What makes these sites even stranger is the consistency in their symbols. Spirals, sunbursts, triple lines radiating outwards, and geometric arrangements that reflect astronomical alignments. Cultures separated by oceans should not share the same symbolic language. And yet, from Ireland's Newgrange spirals to the megalithic carvings in South America, these motifs appear over and over again, as if fragments of the same ancestral memory scattered across continents. The connection to the Atlantic deepens when comparing these symbols to the ancient seal discovered beneath the sea. The same spirals, the same geometric alignments, the same concentric rings. These carved patterns appear to reflect not just art, but knowledge. Cycles of the sun, solstice points, lunar movements, perhaps even star maps recording constellational shifts over thousands of years. Whoever created them understood the heavens intimately. They encoded celestial mechanics into stone long before Europe had its first observatories. One theory suggests that a pre-Ice Age society may have developed a profound understanding of astronomy and earth sciences, not through telescopes or modern tools, but through sustained observation and generations of accumulated data. Their survival may have depended on predicting the world's climate cycles, learning the patterns of the sun, and recognizing the Earth's subtle shifts. In this context, the symbols are not decorations. They are warnings, calendars, knowledge archives meant for those who would inherit a world changed by catastrophe. What catastrophe? Evidence points to a dramatic event around 12,800 years ago, a sudden cooling known as the Younger Dryas, possibly triggered by a comet fragment or massive meltwater floods. Sea levels rose relentlessly over the next millennia, drowning coastlines and erasing entire cultures. What would a civilization do if it saw its world collapsing? They would build. They would carve. They would hide their knowledge where the elements of erosion could not reach, in temples, in underground chambers, in sealed vaults. Which brings us back to the Templars. What did they discover in the Holy Land? What knowledge did they retrieve from ancient ruins, scrolls, or secret traditions preserved through generations? Some believe the Templars gained access to documents recovered from older cultures, fragments of memories passed down through Egyptian priests, Phoenician navigators, or forgotten sects who guarded pieces of the ancient truth. The order's fascination with sacred geometry, celestial patterns, and hidden meanings hints at this inherited legacy. When the Templars began their Atlantic expeditions, they were not acting blindly. They were following clues only they understood, clues pointing to the possibility of a civilization that flourished before the Great Flood, a civilization that left warnings encoded in stone for future generations. And when they found the underwater seal, it must have confirmed their darkest suspicions. Humanity had risen before, and humanity had fallen before. But perhaps the most haunting realization was not that this ancient culture existed, but that it was connected. Its symbols, its knowledge, its astronomical precision appearing across continents suggests a level of contact and communication unthinkable for that era. If the world was once united by a proto-civilization with shared ideas and science, then the ruins beneath the Atlantic might be its heart, its capital, the place where its greatest vault of knowledge was built. And suddenly everything the Templars had hidden, the map, the manuscript, the voyages, the secrecy, made sense. They weren't protecting treasure. They were protecting a memory, a truth too vast for medieval Europe to accept, a truth that could shatter religious doctrine, rewrite history books, and challenge the fundamental story of human civilization. As the camera drifts across underwater ruins, tracing the lines carved by hands older than recorded time, one question rises like a voice from the deep. If a great civilization truly existed before memory, who were they, and what final message did they try to leave behind for the world that would come after them? The Church's relationship with the Templars had always been complicated. A dance of convenience, suspicion, admiration, and fear. The order was born under the blessing of the Church, swore vows of poverty and obedience, and fought in the name of Christendom. But as the years passed, something changed. The Templars grew richer than kingdoms, more disciplined than armies, more knowledgeable than universities. Their power expanded not only across Europe but into realms the Church could not control. Ancient texts, forbidden histories, esoteric symbols, and knowledge considered dangerous for ordinary minds. By the late 13th century, the Vatican archives contained curious warnings written in stern Latin. Let the brothers not pursue the knowledge of the ancients. And in another document, guard against the temptations of hidden lands and the pride of celestial secrets. At first glance, these prohibitions seemed vague, almost metaphorical. But when examined in the context of the Templars' growing interest in ancient ruins, lost civilizations, and astronomical cycles, their meaning became far more literal and far more troubling. According to some scholars, these decrees were not formed out of theological concern but out of panic. The Church had spent centuries constructing a timeline of human history rooted in biblical chronology. The world began with Adam, civilizations rose after the flood, and all knowledge was framed through Scripture. Anything older, anything suggesting a pre-flood civilization equal or superior to humanity, posed a direct threat to that narrative. And the Templars, with their access to older cultures in the Holy Land, were beginning to ask the wrong questions. The order had unearthed scrolls in Jerusalem that predated biblical texts. They had consulted scholars in Antioch who preserved Greek, Egyptian, and even Babylonian accounts of ancient cataclysms. They studied geometric inscriptions that mirrored star maps older than the pyramids. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a pattern that hinted at a world before the known world. A world destroyed by catastrophe, remembered only in myths, and encoded in symbols scattered across continents. This was the knowledge the Church feared most. Not heresy against doctrine, not corruption of morals, but a truth so ancient it threatened to reorder the entire foundation upon which the Church stood. Reports sent to the Vatican from clerics embedded within the order described a brotherhood seeking answers in the stars rather than in Scripture, and meditations upon the lost peoples of the desert and sea. Another report warned of mathematics that traced the heavens in forbidden shapes, likely referring to sacred geometry, a discipline the Templars studied relentlessly. And then there was the most disturbing line found in an early warning letter to the Pope. They speak of a time before God revealed the flood, and of a people who mastered the earth. To medieval theologians, this was not merely academic blasphemy. It was existential danger. If a civilization before Noah existed, one that built vast structures, sailed the oceans, and understood celestial cycles with scientific precision, then the biblical history of the world collapsed instantly. The Church could not allow such ideas to spread. Not when its authority was built upon being the keeper of truth and the interpreter of sacred time. The Templars were ordered quietly, subtly, to avoid certain studies. They were encouraged to focus on defending pilgrim routes, protecting relics, and maintaining their territories. But the order did not obey in full. Their curiosity was not a hobby. It was a mission. They believed knowledge was sacred, not dangerous. And they recognized patterns in ancient pieces of history that the Church had ignored or deliberately suppressed. When whispers emerged that the Templars had found a map referencing a lost island beyond the horizon, a map tied to myths of a great flood and a vanished civilization, Church officials grew deeply alarmed. Not because they believed the story, but because they feared the consequences. Discovery of such a place, or even the suggestion of it, could inspire doubt at a scale they could not contain. There are accounts of priests warning the order, "Leave the depths to God. The sea hides things that must remain forgotten." Some scholars believe this was not poetry, but a direct reference to ancient rumors preserved in church archives. Rumors about structures in the Atlantic described by Phoenician sailors and classified as dangerous knowledge. The prohibition tightened further when a few Templar commanders began teaching their initiates about cycles of civilization, cataclysmic resets, and the ancient race who watched the stars. These philosophies were drawn from texts the Church called apocryphal or forbidden. The Templars saw them not as threats but as potential truths, truths that could unite science, scripture, and history under a broader understanding of humanity's place in the universe. But the Church saw a threat, profound one. A secret meeting was held in Rome, its records sanitized but not fully erased. There, high-ranking members discussed the disturbing direction of the order's scholarship. One cardinal argued that if the Templars continued, they would unravel the chain of holy history. Another insisted the order must be reined in or dismantled. In the shadows of this meeting, a strategy took shape, not only to limit the Templars' influence, but to sever their access to ancient knowledge entirely. Yet the Templars persisted. Their voyages continued. Their studies deepened. Their discoveries multiplied. And in the end, the Church's concern shifted from theological anxiety to fear. Fear that the order had found something enormous, something beneath the Atlantic, something that defied the world as the Church described it. When the arrests came on October 13, 1307, the public charges focused on heresy, witchcraft, and immorality. But the secret charges hidden in Vatican archives, rarely discussed even centuries later, were different. Pursuit of forbidden knowledge, possession of pre-biblical records, and resurrection of ancient truths deemed dangerous for mankind. The Church did not destroy the Templars because they were corrupt, nor because they were wealthy, nor because they were powerful, but because they were asking questions they were never meant to ask, questions about the age of humanity, the rise and fall of civilizations, and a world drowned beneath the sea. A world the Church believed should remain forgotten. The disappearance of the Templar fleet is one of history's most unsettling gaps. Not because the records are missing, but because the records that should exist never did. On the morning of October 13, 1307, when King Philip's men stormed Templar commanderies across France, they expected to seize everything: gold, relics, armories, archives, and most importantly, the order's ships anchored at La Rochelle. But when soldiers arrived at the harbor, prepared to block all escape routes, they were met with an eerie, impossible sight. The docks were empty, not damaged, not abandoned, simply gone. 12 ships, the entire Templar Atlantic fleet, had vanished without breaking a single mooring line or leaving behind a single witness. Fishermen claimed the ships were still in the harbor the night before. A local merchant swore he saw the Templar banners fluttering under moonlight just hours prior. Yet by dawn, the fleet had disappeared as if swallowed by the sea. There were no reports of departure, no records of cargo, no trails of last-minute trading. The Templars had vanished into the Atlantic without a trace. In the chaos of the arrests, this detail was overlooked. But later, When the church and crown realized the fleet was missing, panic rippled through their ranks. They immediately suspected the ships carried treasure, the mythical lost hoard that fueled half the legends about the order. For years, rumors claimed that the Templars had gold, relics, or even the Holy Grail aboard their fleet, sending it westward to evade capture. But treasure alone could not explain the preparations required to move an entire naval force in absolute secrecy. Then historians discovered something even more extraordinary. No Templar fleet logs from the final months before the arrests survived. Not one. For an order known for meticulous record-keeping, this was unthinkable. Either the logs were destroyed deliberately, or the fleet had been preparing for departure long before the king struck. When modern researchers traced the last known movements of the fleet, a strange pattern emerged. Several Templar supply caravans, supposedly delivering goods between inland commanderies, were secretly transporting sealed crates toward the port at La Rochelle. Monks traveling with them reported unusual cargo: iron-bound chests, rolled parchments in protective tubes, and strange angular objects wrapped tightly in cloth. They also reported something else: heightened security, as if the cargo was not valuable in the usual sense but dangerous. What was being moved? And where did it go? The answer may lie in a single line written in a chronicle by a monk from Poitiers. The brothers carried scrolls not meant for kings to see. Most historians assumed this referred to financial records. But in light of the discoveries beneath the Atlantic, the line takes on a darker meaning. Could the Templars have been transporting maps, manuscripts, and artifacts detailing the existence of a lost civilization? Were they moving the evidence of the ancient vault they believed lay beneath the sea? Then came the chilling discovery. In 2012, an underwater expedition exploring a deep trench off the coast of La Rochelle found something completely unexpected: a shipwreck resting far below the depth medieval vessels normally reached. Its timbers were preserved by cold currents, its structure remarkably intact. When divers studied it closely, they realized it was not a standard merchant ship. Its hull was reinforced, its keel extended, and its cargo hold larger than typical medieval vessels. It was built for endurance and for distance. Most astonishingly, one of the iron fasteners bore a faint imprint of the Templar cross. Inside the wreck, divers found no gold, no treasure, no relics of Christian significance. Instead, they found fragments of waterproofed parchment tubes, their contents destroyed by time but their design unmistakable. These tubes matched those used to transport maps and manuscripts. They also found a lead container filled with hardened resin and crushed mineral powder similar to materials discovered in the submerged Atlantean seal formation. That container, though damaged, appeared to have been crafted to hold something delicate, something that needed protection from moisture, pressure, and the elements. Whatever the ship was carrying, it was meant to survive a long journey. But the question remains: was this vessel part of the missing fleet? So how did it sink? And how many ships escaped before the king's forces arrived? Some historians suggest the fleet split into multiple groups. One group may have headed north toward Scotland, where sympathetic nobles offered sanctuary. Another may have sailed to Portugal, where the Order of Christ would later become the refuge of surviving Templars. But the third group, the one that vanished into the Western Sea, is the one that fuels the most intense speculation. Where did they go? Clues appear, faint but undeniable, in scattered sources. A Norse chronicle mentions pale-robed warriors sailing westward, beyond Iceland, guided by a star map unknown to us. A Canary Islands oral tradition describes foreign ships arriving centuries before Spanish conquest, their crew carrying the mark of the Red Cross sun. A mysterious 14th century map of the Atlantic, found in a monastery tied to former Templars, shows an island with concentric rings far out to sea. None of these sources prove the fleet reached the ancient vault beneath the Atlantic. But together they paint a compelling picture. The Templars may have used their final hours not to flee in desperation, but to execute a long-prepared plan. A plan to protect secrets they believed must never fall into the hands of kings or popes. The fleet's disappearance was not an accident. It was an escape. And the shipwreck found deep beneath the Atlantic proves the Templars were willing to sail far beyond the boundaries of their world. following coordinates so precise that only someone armed with ancient knowledge could have understood them. As the camera lingers on the dark hull resting silently under miles of water, a chilling realization settles in. The Templars did not run from their enemies. They sailed toward a destination they believed held the greatest secret of the ancient world. Satellite scans, seismic readings, and remote-operated probes had all hinted at something impossible lying at the bottom of the trench. Straight lines where nature never draws them. Rectangular shadows under blankets of sediment. Resonances that sounded less like geology and more like the slow heartbeat of a machine gone dormant. But nothing could prepare the expedition for what awaited them in the abyss. The vessel hovered above the coordinates at dawn, the Atlantic calm and deceptively serene. The divers suited up in near silence, the weight of history pressing on them more heavily than the gear strapped across their backs. They weren't just investigating a ruin. They were diving into a mystery the Templars had died to protect. When they slipped into the water, the world shifted instantly. Color drained away. Light dimmed. The cold bit through their suits like the memory of a forgotten age. Every meter downward pulled them deeper into a realm where human presence felt unnatural. The only sounds were the hiss of oxygen and the muted thrum of distant currents. Even the fish seemed to avoid this place, as if the trench itself emitted a warning. At 200 meters, the water turned ink black. Their lights cut narrow tunnels through the darkness, revealing nothing but descending walls of rock. At 300 meters, the pressure became a physical force, a crushing hand warning them to turn back. But they continued, breath steady, hearts pounding with anticipation. At 400 meters, the first anomaly appeared. A smooth vertical surface rose from the trench wall, too flat, too polished to be natural. It stretched upward and downward into darkness, wider than the beams of their lights could reveal. One diver reached out and touched it. The stone was cold, unnaturally cold, as though it absorbed warmth rather than reflected it. His fingertips tingled, as if a faint current pulsed beneath the surface. It was no cliff. It was a wall. At 500 meters, the terrain changed again, the rock giving way to a wide plateau littered with broken pillars. Some stood at odd angles, others lay collapsed in geometric heaps. The structures appeared carved, not eroded. Large interlocking blocks, megaliths weighing thousands of tons, arranged in patterns that seemed purposeful. The divers moved cautiously, their lights gliding over spirals etched into stone, glyphs half swallowed by algae, and enormous steps leading downward into the abyss. This wasn't built for humans, one diver whispered through the comms, his voice trembling with awe. This was built for giants, or gods. At 600 meters, the plateau dropped off into a yawning chasm, the trench proper. Sonar readings had shown something massive resting at the bottom, but nothing prepared the team for what they saw as they descended along the cliff's edge. A structure emerged from the darkness, its edges illuminated slowly by their descending lights. It was not a ruin. It was intact. A colossal archway, its keystone carved with concentric circles matching the Templar symbol. 2 pillars rose on either side, each adorned with carvings so intricate they resembled woven metal rather than stone. The arch seemed to pulse faintly, reflecting their lights with an oily sheen, as if coated with minerals unknown to modern geology. But what struck the divers most was the scale. The gateway towered above them like the entrance to a cathedral built for a civilization that dwarfed humanity. And beneath the arch lay a door, a true door, perfectly rectangular, seamless, a slab of stone and metal fused together, marked by a pattern of glyphs that matched those on the seal from Section 8. This was no natural formation. This was engineering, advanced, precise, intentional. "This is the entrance," the lead diver murmured. The Templar seal wasn't symbolic. It was a map. As they approached, their lights picked up something chilling. Carved into the base of the left pillar was a small cross, unmistakably Templar. The symbol was weathered but still clear, as if carved by a hand terrified but determined. Someone from the medieval order had reached this exact spot. They had stood where the divers stood now, and they had marked their presence for those who would follow. The divers hovered before the door, breath shallow, overwhelmed by the enormity of what lay before them. For thousands of years, this gate had remained sealed beneath crushing pressure, hidden from the world, awaiting the day when someone could uncover its purpose. Then something happened that none of them could explain. Their instruments flickered, compasses spun, metal detectors surged with activity. A low-frequency vibration rippled through the water, rattling their bones. It felt almost alive, a hum that resonated through their chests and skulls. The trench walls vibrated softly, as if responding to their presence. The door vibrated too, only slightly but unmistakably. One diver dropped lower, sweeping his light across the carvings. As the beam passed over a central glyph, a spiral intersected by a vertical line, the vibration intensified. The stone seemed to warm under the glow. Silt rose from its edges, drifting upward in lazy, swirling clouds. The door's outline sharpened, as though waking from a long sleep. "Back off," the leader said quietly. "Something's responding." They retreated several meters, but the humming did not stop. In fact, it grew stronger, a deep thrumming sound that felt like the earth itself was exhaling. The trench shimmered in the lights, the water vibrating subtly around them. The structures nearby seemed to resonate in harmony, as though the entire submerged city were interconnected through some ancient mechanism. Then, as suddenly as it began, the vibration ceased. Silence returned, heavy, absolute. The divers hung motionless, suspended in the water, waiting, listening. Nothing more happened. The door remained shut, inert once again. But its brief awakening confirmed a truth too enormous to ignore. The structure beneath the Atlantic was not a ruin. It was not abandoned. It was dormant, and the Templars had known. They had carved their symbol here for a reason. They had left clues not to uncover treasure, but to guide future generations to this vault. A vault built by a civilization older than memory, engineered to withstand cataclysm, and sealed with intention. As the divers ascended slowly toward the distant shimmer of daylight far above, none of them spoke. They all understood the same thing. They had not merely discovered an ancient city. They had touched the outer skin of something far larger, something waiting. The archway did not simply stand in the darkness, it commanded it. As the dive team returned weeks later with heavier equipment, submersible drones, and specialists from multiple fields, they realized the structure was not a gate in the symbolic sense. It was literal, intentional, an engineered threshold carved with such precision that even after 12,000 years beneath crushing ocean pressure, it remained perfectly intact, as if time itself respected its purpose. Floodlights pierced the abyss, revealing the full scale of the gateway for the first time. The arch rose nearly 40 meters high, its curve mathematically flawless. The pillars flanking it were constructed from a stone composite unlike anything in the geological record. A metallic sheen embedded in the mineral grains giving the impression of liquid crystal frozen mid-flow. The carvings that covered the pillars were so dense and fine that they seemed woven into the stone itself, like threads of knowledge knitted into the architecture. At the apex of the arch, a massive disc dominated the design. A perfect circle inscribed with rings within rings, each etched with symbols that spiraled inward toward a central point. Geologists confirmed it wasn't merely carved. It was fused into the stone, as if molded during the building process. Engineers shook their heads in disbelief. Nothing in known ancient construction could compare. One expert whispered, barely able to speak through the comms. "Whatever built this understood matter differently than we do." But the symbol that truly froze everyone's blood lay just below the central disk, a vertical line intersecting the innermost ring, the same emblem that haunted every clue the Templars left behind. It appeared on the map. It appeared on the manuscript. It appeared on the underwater seal. And now it appeared here, at the mouth of a vault older than recorded civilization. The gate to the Atlas chamber had been marked long before the Templars arrived. They didn't invent the symbol, they recognized it. As lights moved along the structure, the truth grew even stranger. The glyphs were not random. They shifted with perspective. When viewed from the left, the patterns resembled astronomical charts, constellations recorded with precision far beyond ancient capabilities. When viewed head-on, they resembled instructions, diagrams of mechanical systems, star cycles, and energy flows. From the right, the carvings aligned into a flowing script that experts struggled to categorize, part pictograph, part mathematics, part something else entirely. It was a language engineered to store information across dimensions. Visual, spatial, symbolic. The Templars must have deciphered fragments of it. They must have stood here centuries earlier with torches instead of floodlights, carving their small cross beneath these impossible symbols in desperate awe. As submersible drones crawled along the surface of the structure, they uncovered an even more stunning revelation. The gate resonated. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a physical one. When the drone's stabilizers emitted a low hum, the arch responded with a harmonic vibration. Instruments confirmed a steady frequency emanating from the stone, subtle but measurable, as if the structure was a tuning fork connected to something deeper within the earth. This was not an entrance designed to be pushed open. It was a resonant lock, an acoustic key, a frequency-activated mechanism. Ancient builders had engineered a doorway that responded not to force, but to sound, to vibration, possibly to specific harmonics generated by celestial alignments or human rituals long forgotten. One geophysicist, listening to playback from the sensors, whispered, "This isn't just architecture, it's technology." Behind the gate, ground-penetrating scans detected hollow space. Vast chambers, descending levels, and an enormous central cavity at least 100 meters wide. But the door itself showed no hinges, no seams, no cracks. It was perfectly flush with the surrounding stone, an unbroken surface that suggested either a sliding mechanism or a metamaterial designed to shift when activated. The team attempted controlled sonic pulses. Nothing. They tried higher frequencies. Still nothing. Then, as a final test, they played back the low-frequency hum recorded during the gate's first awakening weeks earlier. The deep resonance that had stirred the stone like a sleeping giant breathing. This time, something happened. Faint lines, invisible before, glowed subtly across the door, like veins of bioluminescent mineral awakening under the stimulus. The gate vibrated with a slow, deliberate rise and fall, like the pulse of a planet. Silt drifted away from the base as if repelled. The arch's carvings shimmered, reflecting light in patterns resembling the flow of data across a circuit. The structure responded, but it did not open. Instead, the resonance subsided, the glow faded, and the gate returned to its dormant state. The message was clear. The correct key existed, a precise harmonic sequence, but the team had not found it. For the Templars, reaching this place must have been a spiritual shock. A medieval order raised on doctrine and duty suddenly confronted with technology older than scripture, older than civilization itself. It would explain their terror, their secrecy, their desperate attempt to protect the knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. The divers continued exploring the outer walls of the vaulted structure. They found additional Templar markings, faint, hand-carved, rushed. But something else stood beside them, carvings clearly not made by human hands. Etchings so fine and polished they resembled laser scoring more than ancient tools. Patterns that matched star positions from 12,000 years ago. Diagrams of geometric energy flows. Figures like stylized human forms surrounding a central sphere, perhaps a representation of the Atlas chamber itself. The team realized something chilling. The builders of this vault had understood cataclysm. They had seen it coming, and they had built this subterranean fortress to protect something from world-ending destruction. The Templars had not just found ruins. They had found a vault designed to withstand the death of civilizations. As the camera sweeps across the colossal gate, the weight of realization settles across the entire expedition. Something inside this chamber has been waiting for millennia. Something the ancients believed the future would desperately need. Something the Templars tried to reach but never opened. And now, after centuries of silence, the gate to the Atlas chamber has stirred once more, as if aware that the world above is finally ready to hear what it has to reveal. The first attempt to decode the inscriptions failed not because the symbols were unreadable, but because they were too readable. They resembled dozens of known writing systems, yet belonged to none of them. Scholars saw flashes of Sumerian wedge marks, curves reminiscent of linear A, spirals found in ancient Celtic stones, and geometric strokes similar to early Egyptian protoscript. It was as if the language on the gate were a root language, the ancestral mother of symbols scattered across continents after a global catastrophe. And that single possibility frightened everyone involved. High-resolution scans of the glyphs were brought to a multidisciplinary team. Linguists, mathematicians, cryptographers, archaeoastronomers. Each group independently reached the same unsettling conclusion. The script was not merely written. It was engineered, not for beauty, not for religion, but for transmission, for clarity across time. Every symbol encoded multiple layers of meaning. A spiral could indicate water, eternity, orbital motion, and energy flow simultaneously. A straight line could mean horizon, boundary, or frequency depending on its placement. Groups of symbols formed complex networks, part grammar, part equation, part star map. It was language, mathematics, and cosmology fused into a single system. The ancients had not just written something, they had designed an information matrix. And then came the shock. The Templars had known fragments of it. In one of their recovered manuscripts, damaged by time, the ink faded and brittle, scribes found crude copies of several glyphs from the gate. The Templar versions were shaky, hand-drawn, as if transcribed by someone who barely understood their meaning. But they were unmistakably the same symbols. If the Templars copied them, that meant they had stood before the gate. They had traced its carvings in torchlight. They had attempted to decode its purpose centuries before modern science even existed. One symbol in particular captured the experts' attention. A circle split by a vertical line, the same emblem that haunted every major Templar discovery. In the ancient language, this symbol appeared repeatedly near structures and diagrams related to energy, resonance, and cosmic alignment. Mathematicians theorized that it represented a fundamental concept, possibly axis, core, or origin. But when cryptographers studied the gate's inscriptions in full, they realized the meaning shifted based on context. Sometimes the symbol meant center, other times power, and sometimes, chillingly, it meant memory. The circle with line symbol appeared almost like a signature of the vault, the mark of the chamber's function. As researchers worked around the clock, they discovered that the inscriptions near the top of the archway were not decorative. They were instructions, an activation sequence. Not mechanical in the modern sense, but harmonic. They described the frequencies, tones, and resonances required to open the gate. Ancient peoples had encoded sound engineering principles into symbolic language. One researcher, shaking with awe, said, "This is a manual, a blueprint, a musical score to unlock a door." Suddenly, all the strange resonances detected earlier made sense. The vault was secured not with a physical key, but with vibrational harmonics, tones produced by specific instruments or celestial alignments, perhaps even human chanting tuned to precise frequencies. The ancients were using sound as force, sound as code, sound as architecture. But there was something else hiding beneath the surface of the inscriptions. When the glyphs were mapped digitally and plotted in 3D space, the team noticed an eerie mathematical pattern. The ratios matched precession cycles of the Earth, the slow wobble of our planet's axis over thousands of years. This implied that the vault's builders understood astronomical cycles with accuracy that should have been impossible for a pre-Ice Age culture. Even more unsettling, the inscriptions predicted the next major shift, aligning with modern projections of magnetic migration and potential geophysical instability. This wasn't just a vault of knowledge. It was a vault of warnings. The Templars must have understood enough to realize the significance. Their manuscripts included cryptic commentary. The temple beneath the sea holds memory of the turning of the heavens. Beware the return of the older cycle. The first people left for us the knowledge of the second fall. What the second fall referred to was unknown, but the fear embedded in the writing was clear. The medieval monks who copied these symbols did not see them as myth. They saw them as prophecy. Meanwhile, linguists continued decoding the inscriptions with the help of machine learning models. Patterns emerged, definitions sharpened, and then, like a veil lifting, One phrase appeared with startling clarity, written repeatedly along the inner curve of the arch. Within is the chamber of the seven spheres. The seven spheres concept existed in many ancient traditions: Babylonian cosmology, Greek philosophy, Hermetic systems, early Christian mysticism. It referred to planetary realms, cycles of time, or levels of knowledge. But in this context, it seemed tied to something far more literal: the design of the chamber inside the vault. And then came the breakthrough that changed everything. A triangular cluster of symbols near the bottom corner of the gate, previously ignored due to erosion, matched an obscure Templar code found in a manuscript stored in a Portuguese monastery. The code, written in Latin shorthand, translated to 7 rooms, 7 records, 1 light. Perfect match. The Templars hadn't just copied the symbols. They had translated them. They had understood part of the language. It raised a terrifying question. How close had the Templars come to unlocking the vault? And what stopped them? Disease? War? The church? Or something at the bottom of the Atlantic? Something they encountered but never survived? As the expanded translation illuminated more phrases, the tone of the inscriptions shifted. Near the base of the pillars were warnings. Enter only in the time of the alignment. The chamber preserves memory, not life. To awaken it is to witness the past. Those unworthy will perish. This was no tomb, no treasure chamber. It was a record, a vault built by a dying civilization to convey knowledge across ages. A time capsule of planetary scale. And the ancient builders did not intend for just anyone to open it. Now, with the language half understood and the gate responding faintly to sound, the truth became unavoidable. The vault was never meant to remain sealed forever. It was waiting for someone who understood the language, waiting for the right alignment, waiting for a world on the brink, just as theirs had been. The chamber of the 7 spheres was not a single room. It was an experience, a design of such staggering complexity that even imagining it strained the limits of modern understanding. Everything the inscriptions hinted at suggested that this chamber was the heart of the Atlantean vault, the core purpose for which the entire structure had been built. It was not a treasury, not a tomb, not a shrine. It was a memory engine, a mechanism to preserve knowledge across ages, encoded not in books or carvings alone, but in architecture, geometry, light, sound, and energy. The ancients had understood that civilizations rise and fall, that cataclysms come without mercy, and that knowledge must be stored in ways that survive earth, water, fire, and time. They had built the chamber not simply to protect their legacy, but to ensure that the next cycle of humanity would not repeat the mistakes that destroyed them. When ground-penetrating scans first mapped the structures behind the sealed gate, the team expected a maze of tunnels or a single cavern. Instead, they found a perfectly symmetrical design. 7 spherical halls arranged like the points of a star, each connected by narrow stone conduits to an enormous central chamber. The spheres varied in size, the smallest still larger than a cathedral dome, the largest the size of a stadium. The scans could not penetrate the material lining the spheres. It absorbed electromagnetic waves like a sponge, refusing to reveal the full interior. But at intervals, the sensors picked up electromagnetic pulses, faint, rhythmic, as if some machine or crystalline network still murmured with dormant power inside. The divers and engineers stared in awe at the data. No ancient culture should have been capable of this. Geometry this precise required advanced mathematics. Construction on this scale required an understanding of pressure, stress, and resonance well beyond anything known in the ancient world. But the most astonishing discovery came when the scans were used to generate 3D reconstructions of the interior walls. The surfaces of the spheres were not smooth. They were carved with layered patterns, each layer representing a different kind of data. Celestial charts mapping the heavens as they appeared 12,000 years ago. Astronomical precession cycles recorded with extraordinary precision. Fractal patterns mimicking energy flows through the Earth's crust. Diagrams resembling waveforms, oscillations, frequencies, harmonics. Star maps of constellations not only as they were then, but as they would appear now. The ancient builders didn't just record the sky. They predicted it. Each sphere seemed dedicated to a different realm of knowledge. One for astronomy, one for geology, one for mathematics and geometry, one for energy and resonance, one for the biosphere and genetic forms, one for catastrophism, records of global destruction, and the seventh reserved for something else entirely. The seventh sphere was the most heavily shielded. Its walls were denser, its conduits thicker, and its internal pulses stronger, as if something inside still operated even after 12 millennia. The inscriptions outside suggested this final sphere contained the Codex of Light, a crystalline archive built not to store images or text, but something far more profound. The essence of the Atlantean worldview, the core of their science, perhaps even their consciousness encoded into geometric patterns. The divers imagined what it would look like inside. A chamber lit with soft, suspended light. Crystalline pillars humming with harmonic resonance. Patterns swirling like galaxies frozen in time. But imagination could never match the reality waiting behind the sealed door. As the researchers studied the arrangement of the seven spheres, one truth emerged with chilling clarity. This entire vault was built to preserve the memory of a world-ending event. The ancients had recorded the rise of the seas, the shift of the poles, the collapse of their cities. They had encoded it not as myth but as scientific data, a warning for the future. And then, in a discovery that made every expert fall silent, the team found a series of carvings in a deep connecting corridor that linked the spheres. A timeline. The timeline did not begin with the creation of the vault. It began thousands of years earlier. It charted astronomical cycles, solar storms, magnetic shifts, major earthquakes, and rising seas. The symbols grew more frantic near the end. Waves overtaking cities, fire raining from the sky, the earth trembling. The last few symbols before the end of the timeline depicted a planet tilted at a sharp angle, surrounded by spirals that represented chaos, storms, and darkness. And then, a symbol of collapse. A circle cracked in two. The next symbol was a door, the very same symbol found on the gate outside. And the final symbol was the circle with the vertical line. Memory, light, the axis, the core. It was as if the ancients were saying, "We failed. You must not." The Templars, centuries later, must have discovered only fragments of this chamber's significance. Their journals reference a machine that remembers and walls that speak of stars. Their carvings imitated some of the glyphs, but crudely, like children trying to replicate a master's script. They understood enough to be afraid, enough to believe the vault must be protected. But they could not unlock it. Standing before the scans of the seven spheres, modern researchers realized something staggering. The chamber was not simply a vault of knowledge. It was a chronicle of Earth's cycles, a warning encoded in geometry, a message left by a civilization that anticipated its own destruction and did everything possible to prevent the next one. But the seventh sphere, the deepest one, held the secret the ancients considered most crucial. And it remained sealed behind mechanisms humanity had not yet deciphered. As the lights of the submersibles flickered across the massive structures below, a thought settled heavily in everyone's mind. The ancients built this vault with the belief that one day another civilization, ours, would discover it at the brink of a new cycle. And now, after 12,000 years of silence, the chamber of the seven spheres was almost awake. The object rested at the exact heart of the ancient vault, untouched, unmarred, and impossibly radiant even in total darkness. When the submersible's lights first swept across it, the team fell silent. They had expected a relic, a tablet, a stone, perhaps a carved artifact or metallic device. But what they saw instead was unlike anything documented in archaeology, myth, or science. It was a crystal. Not a gemstone, not quartz, but a transparent, geometric form about the size of a human skull, suspended between three-pronged supports that appeared to grow organically from the floor of the chamber. The crystal did not rest on the supports. It hovered within them, as though gravity chose to ignore it. The divers stared, breath catching as shimmering lines of faint light flickered inside the structure, drifting slowly like fireflies trapped in amber. The object pulsed every few seconds with a soft glow, responding to the light of the submersible as if sensing the presence of observers for the first time in thousands of years. The glow wasn't random, it followed patterns, shapes, geometry. It was communicating, or remembering, or both. A researcher whispered, voice trembling. This must be the codex of light. The crystal was positioned at the exact geometric center of the seventh sphere, the most protected, most shielded chamber of them all. Around it, the walls curved outward in perfect symmetry, engraved with fractal patterns that seemed to radiate from the crystal itself. The floor beneath the object wasn't flat but formed a shallow concave dish, as though designed to collect or focus energy emitted by the codex. When high-resolution scanners tried to penetrate the crystal's interior, the signals folded into impossible distortions. The object behaved like a prism and a cipher simultaneously, bending electromagnetic waves into patterns that defied prediction. Whatever was inside the crystal was not simply decorative. It was encoded. It was data, not written but stored, in layers, densities, and frequencies far beyond anything the modern world had ever encountered. The ancients knew that scrolls could burn, clay tablets could break, languages could be forgotten, but crystalline matrices? They could survive oceans, pressure, time, extinction. They had built a memory core that would endure the destruction of their entire world. When the divers moved closer, something extraordinary occurred. Their very presence seemed to trigger a reaction. The crystal brightened, humming faintly, and projecting faint lines of light onto the chamber walls. These projections were not random. They formed shifting diagrams, spirals, star maps, cycles of geometry, lines intersecting across spheres of influence. The chamber itself became the display screen for a long-dormant technology. The codex was waking up. The light responded to the diver's movement, adjusting its intensity, its rhythm, almost as if scanning them. Sensors picked up a dramatic increase in electromagnetic activity, though the signature was unlike any known energy field. Subtle but powerful, ancient yet impossibly advanced. The patterns projected across the walls began to sync with symbols carved into the stone, causing those symbols to glow faintly. For the first time, the team understood the chamber's true purpose. It was not simply a vault but a reader, a device built to interface with the codex. The seven spheres formed a harmonic shell, designed to amplify, contain, and decode the information stored within the crystal. It was a machine of knowledge, a library of light, a recorder of civilization. As more patterns emerged, the projections shifted into something even more astonishing: historical imagery. Blurred, fragmented, but unmistakably visual. Shadows of cities, spirals of energy, waves crashing over coastlines, stars wheeling through unfamiliar skies, massive structures crumbling, a great flash of light, a rising wall of water, darkness. The divers recognized some of these patterns from geological and astronomical models of the Younger Dryas cataclysm. But the crystal was showing more, showing details humanity had never known. It depicted events as if seen from multiple vantage points. The ground, the sky, perhaps even from orbital positions or celestial alignments. The codex did not merely record fact. It recorded perspective. It held the memories of an entire civilization at the moment of its destruction. One researcher began to cry quietly through her mask as she realized the enormity of what they were witnessing. The ancients had not been gods. They had been people, terrified, brilliant people who loved their world enough to preserve its memory at all costs. They had poured everything they knew into a device that would survive them, hoping that the future would learn from their mistakes. And then the images changed. They showed not the past, but the future. Star alignments shifting through projections. Earth's axis tilting slightly. Magnetic fields weakening. Solar activity increasing. Ocean currents stalling. Patterns repeating, eerily matching the cycle recorded before the ancient fall. The codex was not just a historical record. It was a predictive model. It warned of the next cycle, the next cataclysm, the next turning of the age. No wonder the Templars had guarded this secret. No wonder they had risked their lives and their order trying to protect it. And no wonder they failed, because humanity was not ready to face the truth. Civilizations rise and fall not by chance, but by cosmic patterns encoded in the heavens themselves. The codex pulsed again, brighter now, as if urging the divers to understand. Its light cast long shadows across the stone, reflecting off their helmets in trembling rays. The entire sphere seemed to come alive, glowing faintly with geometric brilliance. Then, just as quickly as it awakened, the crystal dimmed, withdrawing its light, its energy, drawing the chamber back into stillness. The codex had shown enough for now. What remained hidden inside it, its full data, its deepest knowledge, would require unlocking the gate fully, activating the resonant harmonics described in the inscriptions. And that, the team realized with a shiver, was exactly what the ancients intended. They had left humanity their final message, their final warning, their final gift, but only if humanity proved worthy or desperate enough to open the chamber completely. They had always been seekers of knowledge, not merely warriors. Their monastic vows masked something more dangerous than military discipline, a relentless intellectual curiosity. The Templars collected ancient texts from libraries across Jerusalem, Antioch, Acre, and Cairo. They studied geometry the Greeks had abandoned, star-lore the Persians revered, and relics the Church declared apocryphal. But nothing shaped them as deeply as what they uncovered near the Pillars of Heracles, encoded coordinates pointing west, toward an anomaly no medieval mind should have been able to imagine. And like the ancients before them, curiosity drove them into peril. The final decades before their fall contained strange gaps in Templar financial records, inexplicable supply shipments, and reports of knights disappearing mysteriously from their commanderies. One must imagine the scene. A candlelit chamber, a circle of senior brothers poring over the manuscript of Brother Matthew and the Atlantean markings they could barely decipher. They knew their discoveries would be condemned as heresy. They knew kings and clergy coveted anything of power, so they swore oaths thicker than blood, oaths that cut them off even from the rest of the order. From scattered accounts and coded letters, modern scholars pieced together the chilling truth. The Templars believed the Codex of Light was not merely a repository of knowledge. They believed it could be activated. They believed its projections hinted at an energy source, a means of illumination or unbinding described in the glyphs, and some of them wanted to harness this power. The forbidden experiment began in Portugal, far from the Church's reach. A remote Templar preceptory near Tomar became the center of their research. Survivors from the secret westward voyages brought back fragments, shards of strange crystalline material, copies of glyphs etched on waterproof parchment, and sketches of the vault's interior. None of these fragments glowed or hummed like the true codex, but energy signatures flickered faintly when exposed to certain tones. The Templars didn't understand what they were dealing with. They mistook memory for power. They mistook knowledge for fuel. One recovered letter from a frightened monk describes nights where strange humming filled the chapel, vibrating the wooden beams like the breath of something ancient. Lamps flickered without wind. Animals fled the outskirts of the property. Brothers complained of dreams too vivid, dreams of spirals collapsing into themselves, of waves crashing over firelit cities, of a massive sphere of crystal suspended in the dark. Some felt called. Others felt warned. The light wants to be awake, one knight wrote, but it does not want to serve us. Still, they persisted. They built resonance chambers, crude imitations of the Atlantean design, circular rooms meant to amplify tone, patterned floors carved with symbols they barely understood. They struck tuning forks, chanted forbidden hymns, and attempted to recreate the harmonics described in the inscriptions. And then something happened. A vibration too low to hear but powerful enough to tremble the skin. A pulse of light that flickered through stone walls. A scent of ionized air, like lightning trapped in a cellar. For one fleeting moment, a shard of the crystalline material glowed. Just once. Just long enough for them to believe the codex could be awakened in full. But the glow did not remain gentle. It brightened abruptly, surging with chaotic patterns the Templars could neither read nor control. A metallic ringing filled the chamber. Dust shook from beams. The walls trembled. According to one surviving testimony, several knights were thrown backward as if struck by invisible force. One man's armor had fused slightly at the seams, as though heated from within. The shard's glow vanished, leaving a scorch mark on the floor and a roomful of men staring at one another, pale with terror. They realized then that activating the codex required a resonance far more precise and far more dangerous than they could produce. What they had triggered was not the vault's knowledge, but a defensive surge, a fragment of the technology designed to protect its deepest secrets. Whispers spread among the brothers. It is alive. It does not wish to be awakened. It chooses who may hear its memory. The experiment fractured the order from within. Some believed the vault was divine, a relic left by an ancient people entrusted with sacred knowledge. Others saw it as a threat, a remnant of a civilization destroyed by its own mastery. Some feared it was not meant for humans at all. Those who survived the resonance surge grew increasingly paranoid. Shadows moved in their torchlight that weren't cast by their bodies. They claimed the codex fragment whispered in frequencies just below hearing. Brother Alan, mentioned in earlier manuscripts, descended into madness, muttering about awakening the vault too soon and the cycle returning. He predicted the downfall of the order months before King Philip acted. When the arrests came, the brothers closest to the experiment fled with their materials, but some never made it out of Portugal. Villagers later spoke of strange lights in the abandoned preceptory, of a collapsing roof caused not by fire or soldiers, but by a great shaking of the earth. Some swore they heard a low humming days after the building stood empty. The Church, had it known the truth behind the Templar experiment, would have condemned it not as heresy but as sacrilege, humanity tampering with the remnants of a civilization that had already destroyed itself with power beyond comprehension. Modern researchers now believe the Templar experiment failed because it lacked the final harmonic key. The ancients had encoded their technology to activate only under specific cosmic conditions, alignments, frequencies, resonance states involving the whole Earth. The Templars were centuries too early. Yet the experiment left a legacy of trauma. Surviving knights refused to speak of what occurred. Their writings grew fragmented. Their final letters ramble about the vault that sleeps, the memory that burns, and the knowledge we must bury, even from our own brothers. And in the end, that is exactly what happened. They buried it. They fled. They died. And the world forgot. But the vault did not forget. The codex did not extinguish. The resonance did not cease. It simply waited for the next civilization to approach the same threshold, the moment when knowledge, arrogance, and desperation converged. A moment like ours. The cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis, or whatever the ancient name truly was, struck with a violence modern humanity can barely comprehend. The Codex's projections, faint and fragmentary though they were, showed the disaster not as a slow decline but as a rapid, terrifying cascade of events triggered by cosmic forces. At first, the crystal projected celestial diagrams. A comet fragment breaking apart in Earth's upper atmosphere, multiple impacts striking polar ice sheets, massive shockwaves racing through oceans. Then the imagery shifted, a world in chaos. The team watched in stunned silence as the crystalline memory played out. A great flash, white as 1,000 suns, but not from fire, from ice exploding under immense pressure. Sea levels heaving, entire coastlines collapsing, cities, vast geometric cities reduced to ruins in minutes. People running, shouting, gathering their children, their tools, their scrolls. The sky turning black with ash and steam. The earth shaking as if a giant had struck it. This was no local disaster. It was global. It was swift. And it was final. Geologists had long known of the Younger Dryas event, a sudden return to Ice Age conditions around 12,800 years ago. But the Codex showed the event not as a climatic anomaly, but as a chain reaction of cosmic impacts and planetary shifts. The ancients did not merely live through it, they anticipated it. Their astronomical knowledge, carved into the walls of the 7 spheres, revealed a cycle, a pattern of cosmic debris, solar eruptions, and Earth's axial wobble converging into a moment of destruction. The inscriptions in the vault described the event with chilling clarity. The sky cracked. The The waters rose with the fury of the sun. Fire fell upon the north, and ice fell upon the south. The winds carried the roar of the heavens. These words, identical in tone and imagery, appear around the globe. In Egypt's first-time myths, in Sumerian accounts of pre-flood kings, in Mayan descriptions of a world destroyed by fire, in Hopi legends of previous worlds cleansed by water, in Hindu texts describing the pralaya, cosmic dissolution, in Greek reflections of a civilization swallowed by the sea. Different cultures, different continents, same story. For centuries, historians assumed this was coincidence, the universal fear of destruction, expressed in poetic form. But the Codex changed everything. Its crystalline memory showed the same imagery mythologized around the world, not from imagination but from survival. The ancient civilization had knowledge beyond anything previously imagined. They understood celestial cycles, planetary precession, energy harmonics, and cosmic timing. They saw the disaster coming generations in advance. They carved warnings into stone. They built underground vaults. They encoded their knowledge into a crystalline matrix they hoped future civilizations would find. But they could not save themselves. The Codex's projections grew more chaotic as they depicted the final days. Massive waves crashing into harbors. Great temples shaking as fractures split their foundations. Priests gathering scrolls and relics, rushing toward the vault. Children carried into underground chambers. Storms blotting out the sun. Mountains glowing red with fire. The sea boiling in white plumes. Silence falling as structures collapsed into darkness. The vault itself, the one found beneath the Atlantic, was shown being sealed. A group of robed figures carved the final symbols into the gate of the Atlas chamber. The sphere containing the Codex glowed brilliantly, harmonizing with the resonant frequencies of the vaulted chambers. The builders, faces streaked with ash and determination, activated the final lock with a harmonic chant. Then the world outside succumbed to destruction. The light faded, the projections dimmed, and the Codex fell silent. The chamber remained sealed, buried beneath thousands of years of rising water, continental drift, and shifting ocean floors. The civilization that created it never returned. Their descendants became scattered tribes, fragments of memory preserved as myth. Over time, their knowledge dissolved into legend. The vault waited, as the ancients intended, for a future civilization to discover it. But there was something more in the Codex. Something unexpected. A second set of projections began to emerge, not recordings but models. Predictive simulations. Harmonic cycles. Patterns of energy the ancients believed shaped the fate of civilizations. These projections showed what would happen when the celestial conditions aligned again. Not if, when. Solar activity rising in waves. Earth's magnetic shield weakening. Cosmic debris fields drifting into orbital paths. Ocean currents stalling as heat distribution shifts. Storms growing in scale and frequency. Earthquakes clustering along fault lines. Sea levels rising in rapid surges. The patterns matched modern scientific predictions with terrifying accuracy. It was as if the ancients had understood the rhythms of the cosmos intimately enough to foresee the next global cycle. And the Codex appeared to be warning, the cycle returns. The Templars must have seen versions of these warnings, perhaps incomplete, perhaps misunderstood, but enough to terrify them. Enough to convince them their mission was not to reveal the vault, but to protect it. Enough to make them hide their discoveries from kings, priests, and the world. And now, with the vault rediscovered, modern humanity stood at the same precipice. The cataclysm that destroyed the ancient civilization was not a unique event. It was part of a repeating pattern. A cosmic rhythm older than any religion, older than any empire, older even than the first human settlements. The ancients fell because they followed the stars too late. They left the vault so that those who came after would not make the same mistake. But the question lingered in the silent, glowing chamber. Will we? At first, the Church saw the Templars as assets, disciplined warriors who secured the Holy Land and protected pilgrims. Their vows made them loyal, their courage made them valuable, and their wealth made them indispensable. But with power came independence, And with independence came curiosity. By the mid-1200s, the Vatican's interest in the order had shifted to concern. Whispers began circulating among clergy that the Templars spent more time digging beneath ancient ruins than fighting, that they questioned the literal interpretation of Scripture, that their studies touched on forbidden cosmology, pre-flood histories, and pagan mathematics. At the time, these sounded like minor deviations, intellectual wanderings of knights who had seen too many cultures, too many traditions, too many truths. But then the reports changed. Letters from bishops in Jerusalem mentioned Templars transporting objects from ancient desert sites under thick secrecy. Priests in Acre described symbols in Templar chapels that resembled neither Christian iconography nor any known medieval art. Monks in Antioch spoke of conversations the Templars held with surviving members of ancient mystery schools, learning languages that predated written history. One Vatican envoy wrote, "They speak of times before God set his covenant. They speak of ages without scripture, and knowledge without priesthood." To the medieval church, the institution that claimed custody over truth and guardianship over humanity's spiritual timeline, this was not merely concerning. It was catastrophic. If humanity had risen before, built civilizations before, mastered knowledge before, and been destroyed before, then the biblical history of the world collapsed. The Church's chronological genealogy, the backbone of its cosmology, crumbled. The Church could not allow it. And then the Templars found the map. Not just a map, but the map, the one pointing to the anomaly in the Atlantic, the one encoded with symbols older than Greece, older than Egypt, older even than Babylon. When word reached the Vatican that the Templars had discovered something linking the flood myths to an actual pre-flood civilization, panic spread through the highest ranks. Not outwardly, not publicly, but silently, behind locked doors and candlelit councils. A classified document still sealed in the Vatican archives, referenced but never released, reportedly contains this passage: "They seek the truth beneath the sea. They follow the signs of the first age. This must not come to light." For the Church, the Templar mission was no longer a threat of heresy. It was a threat of revelation. The early Church Fathers had struggled for centuries to unify the world's mythologies under a single sacred history. Flood myths from Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, the Americas, and Asia all needed to be folded into the biblical narrative. But if a civilization older than Noah truly existed, one with knowledge exceeding anything found in Scripture, then Scripture was not supreme. It was incomplete. This the Church could not endure. To maintain its authority, the Church needed to be the sole interpreter of cosmic order, the arbiter of human origin, the keeper of divine truth. Anything predating its worldview had to be suppressed, erased, or reinterpreted. So the Vatican deployed its quietest weapon: theological censorship. They issued private warnings to the order: turn away from pagan ruins. Seek no knowledge not sanctioned. Trust in Scripture alone. But the Templars did not obey. Their maps became more detailed. Their voyages became more daring. Their discoveries grew more dangerous. They were no longer knights of Christ. They had become archaeologists of forbidden history. Church spies embedded within the order reported that the Templars were studying symbols similar to those later found on the gate of the Atlas chamber. They were discussing celestial cycles, ancient cataclysms, the fall of a forgotten world. They were trying to reconcile their faith with a truth that threatened to swallow it whole. The Church tried persuasion, then threat, then surveillance, then interference. But once the Templars' experimental chambers began operating in Portugal, the ill-fated attempt to activate fragments of Atlantean technology, the Church's fear turned to absolute alarm. Not only had the order discovered the existence of a prehistoric civilization, not only had they decoded fragments of its language, not only had they attempted to awaken its technology, but they seemed to believe it was their calling to protect this knowledge from suppression. To the Church, this was intolerable. A theological memorandum written months before the arrests reads, "The order seeks the forbidden past. Their eyes turn not to God, but to the age before the covenant. They must be broken before they uncover what must remain buried." The Vatican feared that if the Templars succeeded, if they opened the vault, activated the codex, or revealed the cycle of cataclysms, people would question everything: creation, Scripture, Authority. The timeline of humanity itself. So the Church acted preemptively. They did not attack the Templars because they worshipped false idols. They attacked them because the Order stood on the threshold of rewriting history, and the Church could not survive the truth they had uncovered. The suppression that followed was meticulous. Templar libraries were confiscated. Records were destroyed. Surviving brothers were tortured until they contradicted themselves. Witnesses recanted under pressure. Documents disappeared into Vatican vaults. Not to protect the people from evil, but to protect the Church from truth. And yet the Templars had hidden enough away. Maps, manuscripts, symbols, clues, to ensure that someday humanity would rediscover what they had died to protect. They failed to keep the vault hidden. But the Church failed to bury the truth forever. Which brings us to the next part of the story, Section 20, where the Templars' final, secret oath reveals exactly what mission they swore to uphold even as their world collapsed. They had foreseen their doom long before the king's soldiers surrounded their commanderies. The signs were too many: the Church's tightening scrutiny, the sudden interest in their archives, the spies posing as envoys, the coded letters intercepted in Rome. The Templars were not naive. They had been warriors, diplomats, explorers, scholars, and mystics, and they recognized when a trap was being set. But they also knew something else. Their enemies were too late. The knowledge they guarded, the maps, the manuscripts, the symbol language, the fragments of Atlantean memory, had already spread to the corners of the Order far beyond the reach of kings or popes. It lived in hidden vaults beneath preceptories in Portugal, Cyprus, and Scotland. It lived in coded writings disguised as scripture, in symbols etched beneath cloisters, in secret libraries accessible only to the highest-ranking knights. And it lived in the hearts of those who had seen the truth with their own eyes. When the threat became undeniable, the Templar Grand Council convened one final secret assembly. They met not in Paris, where spies lurked, but in a fortified chapel carved into the cliffs of Portugal. A place so remote that even the Church lacked complete records of it. The meeting lasted 2 days. By the end of the second night, the Templars had created a vow so sacred, so absolute, that to break it was to violate the very essence of their souls. They called it Ordo Custodes Memoriae, the Order of the Keepers of Memory. This was not a vow about protecting treasure, not relics, not gold, not earthly power. It was about protecting the memory of humanity's first fall, and ensuring mankind survived the next. The Oath of the Final Brothers. What modern scholars know of the oath comes from fragments. Torn parchment hidden in monastery walls, marginal notes in Templar prayer books, and oral traditions passed through secret societies that emerged centuries later. When these pieces are assembled, they reveal the content of the vow. We swear to guard the memory of the first earth. We swear to protect the knowledge of the ancient fall. We swear to seek the vault of the 7 spheres and hold its warning sacred. Another line reads, "Let no king possess it. Let no pope bury it. Let no tyrant twist it. Let no fool awaken it." The oath bound them not to reveal the Atlantean vault to the world prematurely, for fear that the powerful would weaponize its knowledge or exploit it. But it also bound them not to allow it to be lost. So while France prepared for the purge, small groups of Templars were already sailing out under cover of darkness. Some carried fragments of the codex symbols. Some carried coordinates. Others carried nothing but knowledge, imprinted in memory, preserved in ritual, passed through the generations by coded initiations. What the world saw as the end of the Templars was, in truth, their transformation. The splintering of the order after the arrests of 1307, the Templars didn't simply disappear. They fractured into 5 primary groups, each tasked with protecting a different aspect of their ancient mission. 1. The navigators, those who fled west, taking maps and star charts to safe harbors in Scotland, Portugal, and perhaps beyond the Atlantic. 2. The archivists, those who hid manuscripts in monastic libraries, burying clues in harmless-looking texts. 3. The guardians, those who secured the resonant fragments and sealed them in hidden crypts. 4. The cipher-bearers, those who memorized the ancient script to prevent its total loss. 5. The Watchers, those tasked to observe the sky and track the cosmic cycles described in the Codex. The Watchers were perhaps the most haunting group of all. Their duty required them to monitor the heavens for signs of the next cycle, the alignment, the energies, the pre-cataclysmic conditions the Codex foretold. Templar descendants appear in obscure astronomical societies across Europe. Their symbols appear in alchemical texts. Their geometry appears in Renaissance art. Their prophecies appear in letters exchanged between scholars who should never have known each other. They were watching, across centuries, across continents, across generations, because they believed the next cycle would come. The legacy carried forward. The Templars did not die with Jacques de Molay. They simply changed names. In Portugal, the surviving order became the Order of Christ, whose navigators guided the Age of Discovery. It is no coincidence that many early explorers carried Templar crosses on their sails, or that some appear to have been searching for specific coordinates, not random coastlines. In Scotland, the Order's remnants merged with local brotherhoods. In Cyprus and Armenia, they became custodians of ancient libraries. In Italy, they influenced early Renaissance thinkers obsessed with geometry, proportion, and the heavens. And in secret circles, sometimes branded as heretical, sometimes mistaken for mystics, they preserved fragments of the Atlantean language, encoded into symbols that survive even today in esoteric traditions. Their vow never ended, passed from father to son, mentor to initiate, scribe to scholar. Protect the knowledge. Prevent its misuse. Await the time when humanity is ready. But Section 20 also reveals a tragic irony. The Templars didn't fully understand the Codex. They only glimpsed pieces of it. They feared the power and the warnings, but they never unlocked the full message. The modern discovery of the vault, the resonance, and the projections finally completes the circle. The Templars had been right to fear the consequences of revealing the truth, but they had also been right to fear what would happen if humanity entered the next cycle unprepared. Their final vow was not to hoard the knowledge. It was to deliver it when the time was right. And now, for the first time in thousands of years, that time may have arrived. The next section reveals what modern powers, governments, corporations, intelligence networks, are doing now that this ancient truth is resurfacing. For months, the discovery of the Atlantean vault was kept secret. The dive crews, the researchers, the engineers, all sworn to silence under the strictest non-disclosure agreements. The coordinates were encrypted, the expedition logs locked away, data transmissions sent only through private channels. But in the modern world, secrets bleed. An innocuous sonar anomaly report leaked into a maritime research database. A low-frequency resonance spike triggered alerts in international seismic systems. A satellite captured the faint pattern of light reflecting off the gate during one of the resonance tests. Within weeks, subtle signs began emerging that someone else, someone powerful, was watching. First, it was small. Encrypted pings at the edges of the research team's communication network. Unmarked ships in international waters. A drone caught hovering above the expedition vessel at night. A leaked memo from an intelligence agency referring cryptically to the anomaly west of the Azores. Then came the unmistakable signs. Government interest. 3 major powers, unnamed publicly but obvious to anyone following the breadcrumbs, issued sudden military advisories near the region, citing unusual tectonic instability. They weren't telling ships to stay away for safety. They were establishing jurisdiction, because whoever controlled the vault controlled information older than civilization and potentially energy older than fire. The first modern race begins. Unmarked submarines began appearing on sonar, circling the trench like sharks scenting blood. Satellites repositioned. Deep-sea communication buoys went silent. International waters turned into a chessboard, one where every player knew a move too bold could start a conflict no country could justify publicly. Behind closed doors, classified committees debated what to do. Some argued for extraction of the Codex, a reckless idea, since removing it could collapse the entire vault or activate dangerous mechanisms. Others argued for sealing the area permanently, treating the vault as a threat. Still others, the most dangerous faction, wanted to harness its power. One leaked transcript from a private military contractor stated, If the energy signatures observed in the resonance tests can be amplified, we're not looking at a relic. We're looking at a global-scale technology. The codex emitted patterns that resembled controlled electromagnetic pulses, something between data transmission and energy discharge. If harnessed, some believed it could revolutionize communication, computing, propulsion, even weaponry. It didn't matter that researchers warned the technology was far beyond human comprehension. It didn't matter that the ancients themselves were destroyed by forces tied to the codex's knowledge. In the modern world, power is irresistible. The vault's defense mechanisms wake as unauthorized submersibles approached the gate. Something extraordinary happened. A vibration, faint but unmistakable, pulsed through the water. Instruments aboard the intruding vessels malfunctioned. Depth gauges froze. Navigation systems scrambled. A torpedo-like drone sent by one faction simply shut down and drifted lifelessly into darkness. The vault was not defenseless. It responded like a living organism sensing intrusion, not violently but deliberately. This alarmed the military observers more than any threat of human conflict. This was technology awake enough to react. And the more outsiders pressed near, the more the vault hummed. It was still dormant but not blind. It was waiting for something, a key, an alignment, a resonance, and it recognized that the intruders did not have it. The Templars had been right. The vault was not meant to open for violence. The researchers are caught in the middle as governments began to encircle the site. The original research team found themselves trapped in a geopolitical storm. Intelligence agents demanded access to the data. Diplomatic envoys promised funding if the team shared their findings. Legal threats escalated. Some members of the team were approached privately, bribed, intimidated, coerced, offered positions in powerful scientific institutions in exchange for copies of the scans, the crystal light recordings, the harmonic frequency charts. A few broke under pressure. Most resisted. All of them were watched. One senior researcher's phone mysteriously wiped itself. Another's home was ransacked without signs of forced entry. A third went missing for 3 days only to reappear with no memory of where he had been. The vault was no longer just a scientific breakthrough. It had become a battlefield of competing agendas. And then, the oversight groups appear. This is where the story takes a more shadowed turn. Several ancient societies, long considered fringe, symbolic, or conspiratorial, began to surface. These groups claimed lineage from old orders, old knowledge keepers, old vows tied to the Templars. Their symbols matched some of those found in the vault. Their myths referenced a waking city beneath the Western Sea. One emissary from a reclusive European brotherhood delivered a cryptic warning to the research team. You cannot open what you cannot carry. The vault remembers who destroyed it. The cycle turns again. Their appearance complicated the landscape further. Not only did modern nations want the vault, so did factions who believed they were the spiritual successors of the Templars, guardians of a truth humanity was about to mishandle once again. An ancient message for a modern world as global pressure mounted. One truth became clear. No nation, no corporation, no secret order truly understood what lay inside the vault. They saw only potential power, energy, information, weaponry. But the vault was not built for power. It was built for warning. The ancients had encoded their last message in stone and light. Civilizations fall when they rise faster than their wisdom. Section 21 ends with a chilling realization shared by the research team as they watch military vessels drift ever closer to the trench. Humanity is reenacting the very cycle the Codex predicted. A world driven by technology it does not fully understand. A world racing toward the same cosmic threshold. A world about to repeat the mistakes of a civilization wiped from memory. And the vault, silent and patient, waits for the next movement in the cycle. The hum began as a tremor in the equipment, a vibration so faint the researchers first mistook it for interference from nearby naval vessels. But then the lights aboard the deep-sea submersible flickered. Cameras recalibrated without command. Pressure gauges pulsed in rhythmic spikes, matching a frequency no ocean current could generate. It wasn't mechanical, electrical, or environmental. It was the vault. For days, the tension in the Atlantic trench had been escalating. Multiple nations' vessels circled like predators. Submarines lurked silently. The researchers, still determined to keep the vault safe, found themselves caught between two threats: the ambitions of the surface world and the awakening of something far older beneath it. Every time unauthorized vehicles approached, the faint resonance inside the vault intensified. The gate trembled with barely perceptible motion, as if preparing for something inevitable. And then, without warning, everything changed. A seismic ripple, gentle yet unmistakable, rolled through the trench. Unlike an earthquake, it was not chaotic. It was patterned, measured, purposeful. The submersible drifted slightly as currents shifted, spiraling inward toward the gate as though pulled by some invisible tide. Alarms chirped as instruments picked up low-frequency oscillations emanating from deep within the sealed chamber. The vault was no longer dormant. A sound deep, organic, and impossibly old vibrated through the ocean. It resembled a whale's call, a metallic groan, and a harmonic chant all at once. The divers on the comms fell silent. Their breath hitched. One whispered, "It's calling something." Floodlights illuminated the gate's surface just as symbols across its stone began to shimmer faintly. At first, the glow was subtle, like moonlight on wet rock. But within seconds the glyphs brightened in synchronized pulses, forming patterns that cascaded outward from the central circle symbol. The ancient language came alive, waves of soft radiance running through the carvings like circuits awakening after millennia offline. The divers watched in awe and terror as the gate responded not to any human action, but to the interference of the modern world. The sonar pings from military craft, the electromagnetic signatures from submarines, the low-frequency vibrations of engines, each signal fed into the vault, agitating its dormant mechanisms, coaxing it back to consciousness. The vault wasn't reacting randomly, it was interpreting, assessing, recognizing, and the more signals it absorbed, the stronger its response became. Suddenly, a deep blue glow radiated outward from the pillars, flowing like water into the engravings beneath. The concentric ring symbol at the top of the gate ignited with a brilliant silver-white flash, forcing the submersible's cameras to auto-dim. The humming grew louder, deeper, layered, like thousands of voices resonating from the stone, from the water, from the very seabed. The divers felt the sound in their bones. The gate moved, not outward, not inward, but in a subtle undulation, as though the material of the doorway softened, rippled, and rehardened. This was not mechanical motion. It was structural transformation. The stone-metal composite behaved like a living membrane responding to stimulus. The researchers scrambled to analyze the data. The resonance matched the harmonic signatures encoded in the 7 spheres. The vault was attempting to activate, but without the proper harmonic key, the awakening was incomplete, unstable. If it continued without alignment, it could trigger unknown consequences. A stream of shimmering particles faintly leaked from hairline seams along the edge of the door. They drifted outward like bioluminescent dust, swirling through the water in hypnotic spirals. Instruments identified them as ionized microcrystals, remnants of the vault's internal light-based data system. They floated like stars in a drowned universe. Then came the brightest flash of all. The codex of light, still sealed deep inside the 7th sphere, responded to the disturbance. A focused beam of illumination burst through microscopic cracks in the vault's ceiling, slicing into the water like a spotlight. The beam formed glyphs in mid-ocean, suspended in shimmering geometric patterns. These projections were different from the earlier ones, brighter, more urgent, more chaotic. The vault was sending a message. Not to the divers, not to the governments, not to the surface world, to the sky. The light shot upward, carrying information encoded in frequencies no modern device could decipher. Satellites orbiting above briefly glitched. Radio telescopes registered impossible interference. Auroras flickered unexpectedly across Iceland and Greenland despite no solar activity. The codex was communicating with the heavens, repeating an ancient broadcast, perhaps one it sent during the first cataclysm. Inside the trench, the submersible's hull groaned under pressure fluctuations as the vault's energy rippled through the surrounding ocean. The divers pleaded to ascend, But the research director urged them to wait. This was the moment history had frozen for millennia. Then, as abruptly as it began, the resonance shifted. The gate stopped glowing. The symbols dimmed. The humming softened into a long, fading sigh, and the trench fell into silence again. But something had changed. The team's instruments captured it clearly. The vault hadn't shut down. It had paused, like a mechanism awaiting the next command. It was partially awakened now, not open, not fully active, but closer to activation than ever before. The interference from modern technology had pushed it into a state the ancients designed only to occur during specific cosmic conditions. Humanity had stumbled blindly into the activation sequence through sheer noise and ambition. The researchers knew a threshold had been crossed. Governments knew a threshold had been crossed. And somewhere in the deep, the codex itself, glowing faintly, waiting, knew it too. The vault was no longer sleeping. It was listening. The Atlantic sky churned with unnatural energy. Clouds twisted into spirals that mirrored the glyphs carved into the vault. Satellites recorded strange electromagnetic turbulence across the region, yet meteorologists could not explain the pattern. It wasn't a storm born of weather. It was a storm born of resonance. Down in the trench, the researchers prepared for another descent, this time under the watch of naval ships and intelligence vessels surrounding them like a steel crown. Political pressure had escalated to the breaking point. Every nation involved claimed ownership over the anomaly. Every nation demanded answers. Every nation feared losing control. The researchers knew the truth. Control was impossible. The ancients themselves had barely controlled what they built. But they descended anyway. As the submersible sank through the dark water, the trench glowed faintly from within. Not with heat, not with electricity, but with the soft pulse of luminescence drifting like cosmic plankton. Tiny crystalline traces released during the vault's awakening. They moved like memories come to life. When the sub reached the gate, they froze. The structure no longer looked asleep. Symbols flickered across its stone in silent cascades. The central disk glowed faintly, as if illuminated by a heartbeat. And the door, still sealed, quivered with micro-movements. The vault was not awakening accidentally anymore. It was responding to something. The research director reviewed telemetry. One measurement terrified him. Gravitational fluctuations. Tiny, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Matching patterns from ancient astronomical cycles. The sky above the Atlantic was aligning with a configuration the ancients had called the Great Turning. A celestial convergence repeating every 12,000 years. The ancients predicted their own fall. The Codex had predicted ours. And now that alignment was occurring again. On the surface, the first clash erupted. Unmarked military drones descended. Foreign submersibles launched without clearance. Defense ships issued warnings. Lasers tracked motions underwater. Tension broke in a crack of conflict. Silent beneath the ocean, explosive above it. A torpedo-like probe was sent toward the trench. Not to destroy the vault yet, but to scan it with high-frequency pulses powerful enough to disrupt its mechanisms. The researchers screamed over the radio for the ships to stop. But human ambition is louder than caution. The pulse-fired device descended. As it neared the vault, the water itself seemed to tense. And then the vault responded. Not with defense, not with destruction, but with memory. A burst of light erupted from the door. Not blinding, but clear, prismatic, layered with floating symbols and spirals of geometric brilliance. The submersible's cameras captured it all, data streams spilling in impossible volumes. Inside the vault, the Codex of Light had activated fully, for the first time since the ancient cataclysm. The projections filled the water around the gate. Images of the past, present, and potential futures overlaying one another in a shimmering dance. The divers watched entire epochs unfold in seconds. Vast stone cities under bright stars. Massive temples crowned with crystal towers. Children playing beneath sunlight filtered through resonant domes. Priests chanting in circular halls. Astronomers mapping constellations humanity no longer recognized. And then the fall. The earth cracking. Water consuming continents. Fires raining from the sky. the Great Turning, the collapse of the First Age. Then another sequence, a new civilization rising. Our civilization, repeating patterns, recreating technologies, ignorant of the cycle approaching once again. And finally, a third sequence, two paths branching, diverging like a fork in cosmic time. One path ended in collapse, dark oceans swallowing cities, global grid failure, mass migrations, silence. The other path glowed, a civilization awakened, understanding the cycles, adapting to resonance, harnessing the codex not as a weapon but as a guide. The vault was offering a choice, just as it had offered the same choice to the ancients. The torpedo probe struck the gate, and everything changed. Instead of damaging the vault, the impact triggered the final activation sequence. The symbols on the pillars flared white. The central disk shattered into patterns of light. The door contracted inward like breath, then expanded outward like awakening. A deep, thunderous tone vibrated through the trench, felt more through bone than ear. It resonated across the ocean floor, across the hulls of surrounding ships, across the satellites in orbit, and, most disturbingly, across the sky. Auroras appeared over the Atlantic. The sea rippled with geometric patterns. Every compass within 1,000 miles spun wildly. The vault had begun its opening cycle. But not fully. Not yet. Just enough to reveal one more message. Light spiraled from the door, forming a single glyph in the water, the same circle with vertical line symbol repeated since the earliest clues. Only this time it transformed. The line extended, splitting the sphere into two halves, representing past and future. Then the halves rotated and rejoined, forming a new symbol. A symbol the researchers had never seen before. A symbol the Codex considered humanity's final test, unity. The message was undeniable. The vault would reveal its full knowledge only when humanity acted as one civilization, not as competing nations fighting over a power they did not understand. Below, the door pulsed once more. A final soft glow. Then the hum faded. The symbols dimmed. The vault settled back into waiting. Not asleep. Aware. Listening for humanity's answer. As the submersible ascended, the researchers understood what the ancients tried to tell them. Civilizations are not destroyed by ignorance alone. They are destroyed by division, by the inability to unite in the face of cosmic truth. The vault would remain sealed until humanity proved it had learned what the ancients had not. That survival is not a matter of power, but of harmony. In the days following the vault's partial awakening, the research team lived in a fog of awe and dread. They were exhausted, shaken, sleepless. They had witnessed something no human civilization had seen in 12,000 years, the memory of the world before memory. The deep truth buried beneath myth, religion, science, and fear. The truth that had destroyed the first age and threatened the second. Their footage, secretly copied, began circulating through encrypted channels. Physicists stared in disbelief at the mathematical sequences embedded in the light projections. Geologists recognized unmistakable signatures of ancient cataclysms. Linguists identified a prelinguistic pattern that seemed to encode pure meaning rather than words. Theologians fell silent, some trembling, some weeping. The vault did not contradict any religion, it preceded them. Humanity had always assumed itself the beginning. The vault revealed humanity was the continuation, and the cycle was not yet finished. Meanwhile, the world above simmered at the brink of chaos. Naval standoffs threatened to erupt into open conflict. Intelligence agencies scrambled for control. Corporations drafted plans to monopolize what they thought was an energy source. Secret societies argued among themselves about whether the vault should remain sealed or whether humanity had earned its right to open it. Everyone wanted the vault. No one understood it, and the vault responded to none of them. The ancient builders had left behind a message encoded in light, vibration, and geometry. A message only one civilization could unlock. A civilization that understood unity not as idealism but as survival. A civilization that recognized itself as part of a cosmic cycle, not outside it. But humanity was not united. It was fractured, frightened, territorial. And this fracture, this division, resonated back into the vault. The codex did not open further. It did not respond to the machines scanning it. It did not react to human fear or human desire. It waited. The researchers realized something devastating. Humanity was not failing the vault, it was failing itself. Inside dim war rooms and bright laboratories, debates turned from the vault to the meaning behind it. Is this a prophecy? Is this a warning? Is this a test? What if we aren't meant to open it? What if we are? What if opening it saves us? What if opening it destroys us? The codex had shown two paths, collapse or awakening. But it did not dictate which path humanity would take. It only showed what could happen. The choice remained ours. One member of the research team, a soft-spoken data analyst who had said little throughout the project, finally broke her silence. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from realization. Maybe the ancients failed not because they had too little knowledge, but because they had too much pride. Maybe the vault isn't meant to give us answers. Maybe it's meant to teach us humility. Her words, spoken in a cramped control room lit by tired screens, rippled outward. They reminded the team that the symbols on the gate did not celebrate power. They mourned it. The ancient civilization had mastered energy, geometry, resonance. And yet, in their final moments, when the sky fell and the seas rose, they turned not to their machines, but to their memories. They built a vault of knowledge, not a fortress. The vault was a monument to wisdom, not dominance. A warning, not a weapon. Plea, not a command. The research team returned to the trench one final time, not to awaken the vault, but to listen. As they hovered before the ancient gate, the water shimmering with faint reflections of dormant symbols, they realized the codex had already given humanity its first message. We are not the first world. We are not immune to destruction. We are not separate from the cosmos. We are not alone in repeating our mistakes. And yet, we are given the chance the ancients never had, to see the pattern before it completes. The vault did not open further that day. It did not glow or shift or tremble, but something subtle changed. A single symbol, the circle with vertical line, pulsed faintly, once, like a heartbeat. Not of warning, not of fear, not of judgment, but of recognition. The team understood. The vault was waiting for the moment humanity recognized itself as one. Not one government, not one nation, not one faith, not one science, but one world. A united species facing a cosmic cycle older than its history. Back on the surface, the sky cleared. The electromagnetic turbulence faded. The auroras dissolved into morning light. The naval standoff eased as though the ocean itself exhaled. Humanity did not unite suddenly. It did not become enlightened overnight. But something undeniable had shifted. Leaders who saw the projections felt shaken. Scientists questioned everything. Theologians quietly revised their understanding of ancient texts. Ordinary people who caught glimpses of leaked footage began whispering about a world older than memory. The vault had not opened, but it had awakened a truth humanity could no longer unsee. And so section 24 ends with the most profound moment of the documentary. A quiet reflection that echoes long after the story fades. The ancients left behind a vault because they believed in a future civilization wiser than themselves. The Templars protected that knowledge because they believed humanity would one day be ready. And now, for the first time in 12,000 years, humanity stands at the threshold of that promise. The documentary pauses on a simple, haunting question. What if the vault isn't waiting for us to unlock it, but waiting for us to deserve it? The research team gathered one last time on the deck of their weathered vessel. None of them spoke at first. They watched the sunrise, its reflection trembling gently on the water, echoing the flicker of the codex's memory still imprinted on their minds. Each of them carried a different emotion. Awe, fear, hope, responsibility, uncertainty, but above all, humility. They had touched an intelligence older than history, older than humanity's stories, older than the very continents reshaped by time. And in doing so, they had realized the greatest truth the ancients tried to preserve. Knowledge without wisdom is destruction. Wisdom without unity is impossible, and unity without humility cannot exist. The codex had not opened. The vault had not revealed every secret, but it had revealed enough. Enough to understand the stakes. Enough to understand the cycle. Enough to understand the choice. The research director, his eyes weary but bright, finally broke the silence. "We came here looking for a lost world," he said softly. "But what we found was a future world, ours, and a warning, and maybe a hope." Beside him, the youngest diver nodded. "The ancients weren't gods," she whispered. "They were us. They fell. They tried to save what mattered most. And now, they're trusting us to finish what they started." The team disassembled their equipment. Some prepared to return home. Others prepared to face interrogation. All carried secrets too large for any one person to bear. But the codex had shown them the shape of what was coming, and the shape of what could be prevented. The decision of what to do next was no longer scientific. It was moral, civilizational. Should the world know what lies beneath the Atlantic? Should the vault's warning be broadcast to billions? Should nations be told they are repeating the errors of an ancient age? Should humanity be confronted with a cycle that dwarfed all war, all politics, all power? No one on the research team agreed entirely, but they all understood one thing. Revealing the vault now, in a divided, competitive world, could doom humanity before the cycle even peaked. The ancients had been destroyed by power misused. Humanity now risked being destroyed by truth mishandled. So the team made a choice not of secrecy but of stewardship. The vault must not be hidden forever, but it must not be revealed recklessly. One researcher suggested a global consortium, scientists from every nation, every discipline, working together beyond politics. Another proposed an ethical charter, derived from ancient symbols, focused not on power but on survival. A third suggested releasing fragments of the data slowly, letting humanity adjust to the idea that it is part of a story older than civilization. They were no longer explorers, no longer observers. They had become intermediaries, translators between two worlds, two ages, two cycles of human existence. They turned their eyes once more to the horizon. The vault waited below, not demanding, not threatening, simply observing and listening. The circle with vertical line symbol, the axis of memory, appeared again and again in their minds, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Not a warning of doom, but a symbol of continuity, of passage, of a bridge between past and future. It was the message the ancients carved in stone. The message the Templars inscribed in hidden writings. The message the Codex illuminated during its awakening. The message humanity now had to decide how to live. A camera drone hovered above the ship, capturing the last image of the documentary. The team standing at the railing, the ocean dark and endless behind them, the rising sun splitting the sky into gold and shadow. A narrator's voice, calm yet resonant, offered the final reflection. We are not the first to rise. We are not the first to fall. But we may be the first to understand the cycle we are part of. The ancients left us a memory. The Templars left us a warning. The vault offers us a choice. What we do next will determine whether humanity becomes another forgotten chapter in the Codex of Light, or the first civilization to break the cycle. A long pause. The sea glimmers. And so the question remains, if the vault beneath the Atlantic awakens fully, will we be ready? The screen fades to black. Not with fear, not with certainty, but with possibility. The mystery is not solved. It is passed on.